Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Ichigo Awakens in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 101, The First Night. Throughout Soul Society. The moment it started raining, everyone knew what had happened. Scat Hatch, standing among the beaten sternritters that challenged her, stared into the distance, bidding a silent farewell to her old friend. The old man, known as King Hassan, surrounded by dead Quincy that he felled with his blade, began praying in Arabic for the old dragon. Kiraku, Yukatake, Anohana, every last Soul Reaper knew that Genri Usai Shijikuni Yamamoto was now dead. It was a bitter moment for the Soul Society that it should happen in the middle of the Quincy invasion, and most of the Quincy were relishing the despair and pain. Such a shame. Waiwak said, walking to the shaking form of Ichigo as the teen cried. For a brief moment, I saw my old enemy once again. The ruthless monster that Yamamoto was 1,000 years ago, but that monster was replaced with the weak old man he became the moment you showed up. The hybrid continued to shake, but the tears had stopped, only the sound of heavy rain prevailed while Ichigo's breathing became more heated and aggressive. But he was only delaying the inevitable. That Bankai is mine, along with all that you have stolen from me, you brat. Ichigo was gone. He watched the entire thing and still couldn't see when Ichigo moved from where he was. Where dash? The Quincy King wondered before hearing a loud crunch, crack, and tear of flesh coming from behind. He turned and found Ichigo with claws buried in the side of one of his double's head, which was now separated from his body. Ichigo vanished again, as if he was an afterimage but too solid not to be, with another cry of pain sounding with a loud crunch soon after that. He turned to his other double, light up like a signal fire from the broken blade of Ryujinjaka lodged in his chest, while Ichigo held the crushed head of his secret bodyguard, Nianzal Weasal. The Sternritter with the ability to distort space and twist anything he could see or sense, but Waiwak was more impressed with Ichigo's ability to find the Sternritter in the first place since he was hidden within a shadow. The power I'll gain from you will be extraordinary. Die. He heard from in front of him as Ichigo prepared to cut him in two, Ryujinjaka manifesting a blade of fire to compensate for what it was missing. Before the hybrid could swing his blade, a hole appeared in the top of his head and through his body. My apologies for being so late, Leal said, teleporting to their location in a swirl in space. I was held up by a lowly Arankar and the Squad 8 captain. Waiwak took mild note in Leal being in his Volstandi as he looked down at Ichigo's body, which then vanished. You missed. Waiwak warned the Quincy before Leal let out a shocked gasp as he suddenly fell, his wings now gone. To stop himself from phasing through the ground, Leal had to shut his left eye while trying to regain his wings, but the moment Leal landed, Ichigo appeared and kicked the Sternritter's head so hard it turned to a red mist. The hybrid charged at Waiwak again, only to be stopped by a sword the size of a skyscraper. Ichigo Kurosaki. Gerard Valkyrie, now a giant with feathered wings of light and a Nordic helmet, said to the hybrid in a massive dust cloud. An abomination like yourself is unworthy of dash. The tip of Gerard's sword flew up so suddenly that the blade snapped. Ichigo was floating at chest level to Gerard, holding the broken blade in a large spirit-manifested hand, with evidence of a massive cut that already healed on his chest. Instantly the blade was lodged in Gerard's throat, stabbing through the top of his skull, and the whole body was engulfed in a pillar of flames that reduced him to ash in a few seconds. Ichigo landed a few feet away from Waiwak once again and strode toward the Quincy Emperor, eyes promising death, and the teen intended to deliver. I am going to kill Dash, Ichigo was saying when his body suddenly and started to twist, with dozens of large left hands with eyes started rising up with something shooting from the fingertips. You will suffer for the pain you have brought on my Dash, Pernida started before noticing Ichigo using his Ryutsu to expel the Quincy's nerves from his body. How much Ryutsu does he have? It wondered in shock before a sudden blast of fire reduced them to ash. You. Ichigo said, finishing his previous statement before charging with Ryujinjaka poised to impale the Quincy Emperor. However, Waiwak would not be touched by that blade as Uryu once again took the blow meant for the ancient Quincy. Uryu. Some light returned to Ichigo's eyes as he recognized his cousin, who then grasped his shoulder and leaned in. And there it is, Waiwak said with disappointment in his voice, the sentimentality that ruined the Gotei from the fearsome and powerful force they once were to the dash. He stopped when Ichigo suddenly grabbed Uriah by the throat and tore the broken blade through the young Quincy's body while tossing him aside. Humph, maybe there's some of the original generation in you after all. Ichigo glared at Waiwak with pure hate and was about to attack the Emperor again when the injury he gave Uriah was reflected back onto himself, but before it could heal, a sword passed through his spine and heart, paralyzing him as blood flowed from the vital muscle. The scales are not in your favor. Ichigo heard from behind as a mountain of golden light manifested in the form of a man with a knight's helm and shoulder spikes rose up where Gerard was burned. Leal's body rose back up with a long serpentine neck rising from his torso with an owl face and his skin turning fair, and hundreds of giant hands with eyes rose up. Your Grace, allow me to purge this blasphemous heathen here and now. Leal said as he manifested an arm from light. Ichigo fired a Gran Race arrow from his back, blasting Jugram away, and became engulfed in his black Ryotsu. When it receded, Ichigo was in his hollow from gold with hell's armor, with wings of burning black Reishi, with his Shiakusho blown off his upper body from Shunko, and Zanjutsu in both of his hands while the area around him began to slowly melt and the rain stopped in their location. Never once did the hybrid look to any of the other Quincy, keeping his glare on Waiwak. Your Majesty, we must return. Jugram said as he and Uriah appeared next to Waiwak, Jugram looking burned from taking Ichigo's Zero. Night is falling. The Emperor weighed his options, but ultimately decided to pull back. It wouldn't do him any good if the Zero Squad didn't take Ichigo to the royal realm. Go. Recover all of our allies. We're retreating for now. A portal of darkness appeared while Gerard and Leal went off to gather the lost Quincy. Next time will be the last, my lost child. Waiwak said before he, Uriah, Jugram, and the hundreds of Pernitas left. After a literal minute, no Quincy were detected in the Siriti and Ichigo released his form, roaring in frustration, pain, and loss at how the day went. Aftermath. It was a somber tone that hung over Seoul society, for all of their preparations and still things turned out like this. Most of the Siriti was wrecked from the fighting, thousands dead, hundreds injured, some with a few scrapes, others with crippling injuries, some are still on death's door. Half an hour after the Vandenreich departed was when Orium finally came by along with who else remained in Hueco Mundo, and Anohana immediately set her to work with the critical patients. Thanks to her, many were brought back to peak physical ability, but those with Reishi-based ailments were taking longer. She finished healing Zaraki, whose body almost tore itself apart from his Bankai in his fight with Gerard, Kiraku, and Starkei, who had several holes in their bodies from their fight with Leal, Hitsugaya, whose body was shattered in places where he froze himself to fight Pernita, but she was stuck with Byakuya, whose own Ryotsu was killing him. She tried not to think about who might be dead, because if she did she would lose her control of the power of rejection, and no one there could afford that. She was kept on the people that Anohana had to consider more vital, and the captain couldn't afford to gamble on resurrecting the dead considering how long Orium was taking with healing those damaged by the Quincy. Those that died in battle were being gathered and transported to Squad 12 for the off chance they could do something that the 4th Division couldn't, but it was mostly storage for when they could be offered a proper burial. It didn't stop Mayuri from fiddling around with some of the bodies until Urahara stopped him with a more intriguing project, cybernetics with Chad as their first test subject. Somehow, the Fullbringer was keeping himself alive by using Fullbring on his own blood to keep it flowing to his brain and on the air to oxygenate it. It was a trick he learned when he met another Fullbringer by the name of Oramichibane when he returned to Japan before going to the Shoten, and it was all he could do to keep himself from dying. Kisuke and Mayuri were dead set on making sure this project succeeded with Chad because Ichigo needed some wins. Ichigo himself carried back the bodies of Yamamoto and Kojiro, bringing both to the Squad 1 barracks where the other captains that could move had gathered, along with Scat Hatch and King Hassan. Yoriyuki took temporary command of the 2nd Division and Byakuya was still in the hospital. Anohana was only able to be there because Orium was healing people in her place. Jin was there, but his usual smile was gone, and when Ichigo saw his eyes open briefly he saw nothing. They were dead, and that told Ichigo one thing. Ranjika was gone. It took everything he had not to break down, holding on to his anger as his grip tightened to the point he was breaking the bones of the former captain and lieutenant of the 1st Division. The sound snapped him back to reality as he carefully laid both on funeral pyres that Tessai had the Kido Corps make in the Squad 1 courtyard soon after the battle ended. The members of the Kido Corps lit Kojiro's pyre while Kiraku, Yukatake, Anohana, Scathatch, Hassan, and Ichigo lit Yamamoto's. They stood by watching as the old man, their leader, their teacher, father figure to some and grandfather to one, burned away to ash. Without Ryujinjaka, Yamamoto was vulnerable to flames once more. That power was now Ichigo's. No one said anything while Kiraku and Yukatake placed a hand on Ichigo's shoulders, offering their support and sympathies. The only thing going through Ichigo's mind, beneath the fury and sorrow, was what Uriah said to him. All according to plan. Ichigo knew he was away for a while and things happened without him. He knew they'd construct plans to take out the Quincy King. He knew that they took great pains to sever any connection between Wiwak and them, but what was the overall plan? He pieced together that it had something to do with Uriah being a double agent. He knew his cousin, but how did Uriah gain so much trust in so little time? Come on, Ichigo. Kiraku started, pulling Ichigo out of his thoughts. The old man wanted us to read his will. Everyone else, return to your divisions and get ready for the next fight. The captain ordered, taking over Yamamoto's position as the fires burned down to embers and the remaining members of the 1st Division gathered Yamamoto's ashes. Before the Quincy attacked, Yamamoto gave us his will. I'm taking over as Captain Commander of the Godai for the foreseeable future until you can prove your capability as a captain. That's fair. Ichigo admitted, seeing as he wasn't a leader in the other world so much as did everything himself. He'd need more time to become a proper leader. But before you can become a captain, you'll be training under us. Scathatch told him, pointing to herself and Hassan. My name is Scathatch and he's called King Hassan. We're old friends of Yama and he asked us to teach you our skills. To become as strong as you can to achieve that goal to protect everyone you can. Hassan continued. To ensure the future of the Shinigami is in capable hands. But should you fail our training, you will die. Yama did give us permission to be as rough with you as we want. The Shadow Queen smiled viciously at Ichigo. Bring it. I look forward to your lessons. The hybrid returned, showing no fear and earning her approval. One more thing, Ichigo. Kiraku said as he pulled something out. Read this. He handed a letter to Ichigo, who proceeded to unfold it while everyone left the room with the exception of Anohana. Ichigo, my student, if you're reading this then I have finally met my end. In my life I had done many things that I regret. The original Quincy massacre, allowing the Central 46 to interfere with my school, not preventing crimes that you've had to take the burden of, but only 3 regrets stand out the most to me as I write this. The first of which is that you once again must clean up after an old fool and finish this war. To aid you, Uriah has infiltrated the Vandenreich under the guise of a double agent that returned to them after spying on us. This was accomplished with Tsukishima's specific Fullbring attaining a new form that allows him to rewrite memories en masse and theoretically even rewrite how powers work, though that remains untested due to the strain it had just giving Uriah his cover. That explains what Uriah was doing. Ichigo muttered out loud as Anohana reached into her shiakusho to pull out a few sheets of paper. Here's some of the intelligence he managed to send us. Read it over when you've finished with Yamamoto's letter. Ichigo nodded as the captain left to return to her division and he kept reading. My second great regret is that I will not be passing you my Haori personally, to see you inherit my mantle as the ultimate culmination of our efforts in your training. But alas, it is a sight I will never see. All I can give you is my Zanpakuto and the power that comes with it. If I'm right, the Zero Squad will come down to bring you back to the royal realm to do any final preparations. Which leads to my final regret, that my last words to you are in order, but know that I'm proud of you. A most magnificent Soul Reaper. Your final mission from me, undo the original sin of Soul Society. Original sin. Ichigo thought in confusion before finding a Kido spell that hid a second sheet of paper behind Yamamoto's message. Ichigo began to read it and felt himself become sick to his core. Time passes. Okay, let's see if we can figure this out. Ichigo thought to himself as he made his way to where the Zero Squad would be making their landing. How am I going to revive the Soul King? A good first step would probably be to return his heart. Zanjitsu spoke up. That report from Uriah said that the heart and left arm were with Wywak as part of his elite guard. Though you'd probably have better luck if that Gerard fellow wasn't a titan of a being when you put him back in the Soul King's chest. The information Jugram gave Anohana was a list of rebelling Sternritters and the shrifts that every other Quincy had, as well as the hidden secrets of Gerard being the Soul King's heart and Pernida being his left hand. Haven't heard from you in a while, Zanjitsu. How are things in there? Ichigo asked, genuinely curious due to the absence of Ryujinjaka's voice. Ryujinjaka is comatose and dying, but Kyoka is doing what she can to keep him stabilized. A broken Bankai is a serious wound, Ichigo, and his was broken before it was absorbed by you. I'm able to fix myself because of all the Azuashi I've devoured, and Kyoka doesn't have a physical form in her Bankai, but Ryujin used the last of his strength to help you fight for that small amount of time. You need to get to Urtsu soon if you want his power. I didn't want it. Not at the cost of his life. But I will accept it if only to kill Wywak with it. He said as he finally reached the other captains as they waited for the Tenhyurin to land, walking next to Kiraka, who was now wearing the Squad 1 Haori. How much of it did you know? The hybrid asked his fellow student of the Old Dragon. Enough. Chances were that if Wywak succeeded in killing the Soul King, we'd have to do the same thing to you. Kiraku admitted to the teen. But I bet it wouldn't play out that way because you'd probably sacrifice yourself instead to be the linchpin. I'd rather be sitting on a throne instead of being trapped in a crystal, but yeah. Probably would. How are you going to do it? Probably with the Hogyaku. Ichigo could still feel it, sleeping and awaiting his summons. It can practically grant any wish for its master. The Tenhyurin fell and the two silently agreed to drop the conversation while Ichigo stepped to the front as the pillar opened. Hello to the most useless squad of the Soul Society. The hybrid loudly and proudly yelled it, instantly stopping any fanfare the 5 members of the Zero Squad were planning. How was it just sitting on your lazy asses while we did all the fighting? Tenjiro Kairanji, a man with a large hooked pompadour, black hakama pants, sandals, and an open jacket stepped up to Ichigo. You'd best watch your mouth, brat dash, he was interrupted by the teen spitting in his face. You're the last person I want to hear anything from, Tenjiro. The hybrid growled. Of all the Zero Squad, your contribution to Soul Society is the most useless. Tenjiro calmly wiped his face, but he was seething at Ichigo. What was it again? Oh right, so-called healing springs that require the person bathing in it to have a captain-level Ryutsu or they'd be killed by the healing process. The only one that's actually detrimental to its intended purpose. When was the last time you actually healed anyone without those puddles? The Zero Squad member immediately punched Ichigo in the face faster than anyone else could see and grabbed the hybrid by the throat. Listen, brat, I was willing to give you a pass from your earlier visit. Ichigo calmly stepped back and showed Tenjiro his severed hand, but I will not. You're also slow. Ichigo returned as the healer looked to his left arm, cut off in the middle of his forearm. You didn't even notice that you failed to hit me. Ichigo tossed the hand back and Tenjiro attempted to catch it, only to yell out in agony as he discovered just how mangled his right arm was. It'd be easier to pick out what wasn't twisted or broken. I don't care what you have to say. The hybrid continued as he marched right up to Ichigo. I'm going back up to the royal palace. Urtsu is going to fix my sword. I'm going to thank him for being one of the more useful members of your crappy little club, and then I'm going to do your jobs and kill Wywak. Understand? Ichigo growled as his eyes glowed golden with heat radiating off him. That is why we came down. To help. Ichigo agreed, bringing a friendly hand down on Ichigo's shoulder only for the hybrid to swat it away. Don't touch me. Ichigo growled before walking away. Come on. Prove you assholes are actually useful. Silburn. Jerome, Gremmy, Pepe, Mask, Uskin, Asnod, Nanana, Arjuna, Quilge, BG10, Discroll, Royd, Lloyd, Nianzal, Basby listed off as he lounged about in a room with Jugram, Bambietta, Lil Tato, Meninas, Candice, and an older-looking man with light brown hair, thick mustache, shallow cheeks, and glasses named Robert Accutrone. That's 14 of the Sternritters that died in that assault. A little over half. And they all went on to fuel His Majesty, because that's all we are to him. Robert added. Fuel to expand his lifespan. He took another look around the room. Is this really all we can prevent from dying pointlessly? The members of the Scout's staffel are devoted to His Majesty, Jugram answered. Bernice might make us doubt ourselves with her shrift making her a liability, and from what I've heard from Urayu, King Du is going to die. Either by Ichigo's hand or Jin Ichimaru's. Giselle is still alive. Are you not including her? Robert asked, noting the one stern ritter that was still unmentioned. No, she's crazy. All the women immediately stated. Ah, that's mean you guys. The women froze in horror before looking at the door to see Giselle. I'm just really passionate about keeping the people I like close to me. She was immediately surrounded by the rest of the stern ritters, with bows, swords, and a gun ready to strike her down. I was just wondering if I could join this club. Why? Bambietta demanded, not trusting the zombie for a moment. Well, pretty much all the surviving stern ritter plan to betray His Majesty. Might as well be on the winning side. If even Jugram is against him, that tells me enough. But, you should probably get moving and spy on Urayu. If no one finds it suspicious that His Majesty named him the successor to his throne, he might catch on to us. Giselle warned, seeing as the majority of remaining stern ritters were now in that one location. Realizing the folly, they timed their departures with Basby taking the first watch of the new heir apparent of the Quincy Silbern throne room, earlier. They really think I don't know. The Emperor thought to himself as Urayu departed from the throne room, having just been crowned the prince to the relatively mild surprise of the remaining stern ritters. No matter. They're simply meant to distract the Shinigami until I can ascend to the royal realm. However, since I am now lacking some proper shields, I should replenish them. Pernida. The Quincy King called to the living hand. I have a mission for you. Bring me the twins. Alive. Chapter 102, Night of Recovery. Soul Society, Squad 4. It was unknown how much time they had before Waiwaka's next assault, so Kuraka ordered everything vital be done as fast as possible. Despite successfully taking out so much of the enemy, the Scout's staffel proved themselves to be much greater danger due to their nigh unkillable states. Leal had left Kiraku and Starkey in bad states, and if it weren't for Orium, they'd be dead. Gerard only got stronger the more damage he took, and Pernida seemed to adapt in his fight to ensure its survival. Ichigo kept a tight lip about how he planned to finish this, as the hybrid felt no trust for the Zero Squad, and he had a feeling Ichibe was watching him closely, but the Zero Squad wouldn't leave without Ichigo, who refused to leave until the Soul Society was properly aided. It was a race against the clock for Ryujinjaka's spirit, but it seemed like the many Zanpakuto spirits invaded Ichigo's inner world to try and help the Fire Sword. It'd probably be faster to just teach Retsu how to monitor them. Tenjiro complained as he was forced to work with Anohana and Urahara in making new effective healing springs. Kisuke kept the original plans from his first recreation 100 years ago, which was serving as the base for the new springs. Shut up and dig. The Squad 12 captain yelled, throwing an egg at Tenjiro's head while he and Anohana continued their work. There's a fairly large gap in power when we consider ranks, but I think a good base level should be the third seat. Or maybe we can make it so it reacts to how much Ryutsu the subject bathing has. She added, noting the possibility. So the more bathing, the faster it'd be, or rather if Zaraki was in it then no one else is allowed. Urahara guessed. Yeah, that might prove difficult to use. Maybe more springs of varying strength. With giant labels so no one accidentally steps into the wrong spring. The two adamantly agreed, not trusting anyone to not make the mistake. But that's just for physical injuries. How about a spring that can heal diseases and poisons? Tenjiro did mention that he had something for replenishing blood. But that was because the other healing spring drove out the damaged blood in Ryutsu. Would you be able to make some leeches that could be used to suck out the toxins and disease? Sounds like something we could do. But where to put that spring? The two continued planning while Tenjiro finished digging the first pit. I'm feeling rather unappreciated. He complained, wiping off some sweat. While he continued to help the Retsu and Kisuke improve the healing ability of the 4th Division, the rest of the Zero Squad were roughly in the same area. Eat up everyone. There's plenty to go around. Shouted Kiryu Hakaifun, who had went from a plump woman to a slender and busty version of herself as she continued to cook. She went from fat to slender as a result of pumping her ryotsu into her cooking, which was helping to strengthen the people eating it, while Kiryu herself was eating a large amount of reishi restoration food and drinks that Squad 12 made to rejuvenate people after exhausting fights or training. The nutrition in all of the reishi food bars and drinks kept her going while cooking her food, which she insisted was better for body and spirit. She's really excited. Senjumaru noted as her many arms wove new Shiakusho and Heiris for the Shinigami and Aaron car. Getting inspiration from the Iero of the Aaron car, she had decided to experiment with new threads and weaving patterns until she created a new fabric that would serve as an armor. So long as reishi was supplied to the fabric, then it would gain a steel-like quality that could defend against attacks to a certain degree, which made it better than having no armor and just relying on sword skills. It was still inferior to Ichigo's regenerating Oken uniform, but she had more time and better materials for that. She loves cooking, and when was the last time she had this many people to cook for? Uratsu asked as he did general repair of Zanpakuto, along with the occasional scolding of some people he felt were mistreating their Zanpakuto while reminding others of what Ichigo said about the swords and their spirits. With him, kept safe in a vat of reishi-rich jelly, was the broken remains of Ryujinjaka, sustaining it along with the Zanpakuto spirits within the realm of the sword spirits. As all of this went on, Ichigo was with Ichigo doing the one thing he could actually help with in the outskirts of the Rokon. "Come on Ichigo, focus," the old monk advised as Ichigo manifested spirit projection of his hands, just big enough to engulf someone in one hand. "If you want to maintain your claim that you'll kill that brat, then you'll have to last against me a little longer than that." Ichigo effortlessly created a far bigger hand and thrust his palm at Ichigo, throwing him a few hundred miles away. "Better," he noted as Ichigo instantly appeared behind him with a hard kick to his side that sent Ichigo flying back just as well, only for him to jump back easily while healing a fractured arm. "I still get the sense you're holding back." "I won't when it's Wiwak I'm fighting." The hybrid returned, not winded but still trying to get full control of his newly increased ryotsu and strength. "I promised that I would kill him. Everyone eventually pays for their sins, especially people like Wiwak." Ichigo was getting ready for the next round when Ichigo interrupted him. "I've been meaning to ask about that brush. I know you have power in names, but can you really write what you need to with that?" The old monk paused and laughed before taking up the calligraphy brush on his back. "Well, in its base form whatever kanji I write comes into effect." He started explaining while writing light, making a bright orb of light. "And when I strike something, the name of that gets severed. Imagine losing the strength in your arm because its name was now AR. When I activate the Shikai, I gain full control of all things black in the universe. The state after that allows me to rename anything covered in Ichimonji's ink," he stated, surprising Ichigo with his power. "Was it really safe to tell me that?" the hybrid asked as the old monk laughed. "It won't make any difference Ichigo." He returned his brush to his back as he manifested a giant hand again. "Come on, back to it. We're training until I beat that stubbornness out of you," he said before stomping a giant foot on the hybrid instead, Ichigo just barely catching it with his own spirit hands. "So, gotta kill him before he uses his brush. Shouldn't be too difficult," the hybrid surmised before lifting the foot up and getting sent flying by a giant finger poke. Meanwhile, in an underground bunker. "Okay, everyone line up while we distribute the rations," a woman called Masayoshi yelled out to the massive underground bunker Squad 12 set up. Masayoshi was someone Ganju found during a patrol and she helped him catch a thief. She wore an auburn ponytail that reached her shoulders and had amber eyes. She pretty quickly latched onto Ganju and strove to become a member of the Rokon police force, otherwise known as Squad 14. In another world, before she died, she was serial ubiquitous, but she lost her memories upon entering the Soul Society, taking on a new name with a purpose to help anyone she could. As of now that was maintaining order while her superior, Ganju Shiba, oversaw distribution of rations. "Okay, we've got 2 pounds of rice, a head of cabbage, and an option of fish or pork," he yelled out, making the people decide on what to go with their bread. Initially, the people were pissed at being forced into the underground for the past week, but then came the first assault of the Vandenreich, which made the ground above them shake with the fury of battle. That shut them up rather quickly, but it also scared much of the populace. This won't do. I'm supposed to help give these people peace of mind. What can I do? He wondered as he saw a bunch of kids, lonely orphans huddled together and shaking. Ganja reached into his pack and pulled out some small-scale firecrackers and sparklers. Well, maybe I can distract them a little bit, he thought as he grabbed a hefty chunk of beef he had reserved for officers. Hey kids, he said, getting their attention as he sat close to them, generated a shak-keho lit a few sparklers before passing them out while sticking the beef chunk on a skewer. Let me tell you all a story. The story of Kai and Shiba. With the Kido Corps. Okay. Let's do this. I'm doing this. Ikeka thought as he marched his way through the division, trying to find the commanding officers while the rest of the division tried to restore the barrier that kept the Quincy trapped in their land of shadows to maybe buy them a little more time. He felt a personal need to do what he was here to do, a drive that was almost as strong as his loyalty to his captain. He eventually found his way to Tessai's office, which was a mess of papers, scrolls, and books as the commander and Haki tried to find something among the tomes of Kido knowledge. He knew he'd be interrupting, but he needed to do this now while he still had the chance. Sirs! He loudly shouted, surprising the two Kido masters. Lieutenant Madarame? Is there something we can help you with? Hachigen asked as Tessai continued to scan through the scrolls. Two things, sirs. One that can be done by anyone with a certain level of skill in Kido. Tessai didn't even spare a glance at the lieutenant, but the room did feel a bit heavier. I want the kanji for 3 and 5 tattooed on my left shoulder. The commander started growling with annoyance. Why are you bothering us with such simple dash? Second, I need to learn Kido. That one actually surprised the pair, for such a devotee to Squad 11's melee-only policy with the sole exception being the now-deceased third-seat Ichigo Awakens. My best friend is gone, sirs. He loved the number 3 as he thought it was the most beautiful, with 5 being a close second, and he was the only Kido user in the 11th. This is my way of honoring him. I need to learn Kido. Tessai stood up from his desk and walked over to the lieutenant, grabbed his arm and locked it while twisting Ikeku's shoulder, making him release a quick cry of pain. Normally I would feel insulted by your utter disrespect. Tessai held up a finger, glowing with Kido. But I did abandon my post and commit crimes to help my friends. He slowly branded the 2 numbers into Ikeku's shoulder, the man himself groaning but biting back the pain as much as possible. If we manage to survive, make your way back here and we'll start your lessons. I'll be harsher on you since Ichigo actually had a talent for Kido. He let go as the branding ended, leaving a black 3 and 5 on his left shoulder. Now get out. We're still working. Squad 2 Barracks. This place seems so much emptier without you around, little B. Yuriyuki thought as she wandered down the halls of her old division, noting how different the world becomes when someone close to you is suddenly gone. The entire atmosphere in the barracks had a somber tone to match the Shihoin's mood, despite the purpose of the Onmitsukido to be unfeeling assassins. The sadness for the loss of their captain still held. Some more than other as the sounds of struggle brought Yuriyuki to her office, finding Lieutenant Mareki Yoomada on his knees with a number of the squad wrestling with him. Get off me. I need to do this. The man yelled, knocking some of the people off him as some tried to pry Omada's Zanpakuto out of his hand. I can't take this shame. Yuriyuki calmly walked up to the thrashing man, placed a hand on his shoulder, and punched him in the face, which sent him flying into the wall. Confiscate his sword. She ordered as the squad immediately obeyed, taking away Omada's Zanpakuto as Yuriyuki walked up to the man, tears pouring down his face. Lieutenant Omada, why the hell are you trying to kill yourself in my office? She said, catching herself as she needed to stick with reality. The Squad 2 lieutenant seemed to finally recognize Yuriyuki was in front of him as he fully prostrated himself before the noble. Lady Yuriyuki. I'm a failure. He admitted as he struggled through his tears. I wasn't strong enough to help my captain when she needed it, and now she's gone. I was supposed to be her partner, and she died while I'm still around. He let out a broken sad laugh. I can't even take the shame and would rather kill myself to atone for this disgrace. My weakness got Captain Swafon killed. He went back to sobbing while Yoriyuki looked down at the pitiable soul, before grabbing his collar and slapping him harshly a couple times. "You're right, you are a failure," she yelled before lifting him off the ground. "The lieutenant has to keep it together in the event that the captain isn't around to take command and continue the mission. You became a sobbing wreck and now have the gall to think that taking your life is making up for that failure. You have a mission, Mareki Omada. So I expect you to see it through, for Swafon's sake if nothing else," she roared before dropping him, the man crumbling on the floor before getting up to a kneeling position before her. "Captain Yoriyuki Shihoin, please," he started, his voice becoming level as he begged. "Make me a proper Shinigami. The kind that Captain Swafon would be proud of." Yoriyuki nodded in approval as some life came back to the man that was so ready to kill himself. "I will. But don't complain if you die in the process. Squad 12 storage, recently deceased. How tasteless," Rukia thought as she entered the area the Godii was forced to callously stick their dead comrades. No time for more honorably burials when in wartime. It was harsh, to not afford so many the time to properly mourn and say goodbye, but that's the way life is. It doesn't care if you're sick, if you're depressed, someone you loved died, or some other tragedy happened in your life, time moves on regardless. Sure, there are some that can offer sympathy and a helping hand, but you still need to move on with your life. The Squad 13 lieutenant forced herself to keep it together when her brother almost died, when her surrogate brother and sister Homura and Shizuku almost died taking an arrow for her. Even Ichigo was dragged away because the Zero Squad had to finish his training instead of being the rock she and her sister wives needed. Especially now when they may very well have lost two of them. And here you are, in cold storage, instead of with us, Rukia thought as she reached the body of Rangiku Matsumoto. "We're sorry, Rangiku, but we needed Orium to heal other people." Quincy arrows and spirit weapons slowed Orium's healing ability, but not to an impossible degree. Some were quick while others like Kiraku and Byakuya's were a snail's pace. When she finally had the chance to look over the dead, her own Ryotsu was depleted and, as they suspected, she broke down crying seeing so many gone. Especially Rangiku, who was like an older sister to many of the girls in Ichigo's love circle. "You aren't supposed to be here," Rukia cried out as tears she's been holding back finally fell. "You wanted to marry him next. You wanted to have his kids. You should be with us making us laugh and smile. Why did you have to?" She thought she was alone, letting out the pain she held back, but someone else came to visit the lost loved one. "So this is Rangiku Matsumoto." Rukia stopped crying and snapped her head to the sea, seeing the blue-haired woman Ichigo came back with. "I was told she and Ichigo were lovers. Along with you, I'm guessing." Rukia nodded, still in a bit of shock. "As death parties, I was Ichigo's second in command while he was in my world. As well as his mate, well, one of them but the one that came back with him. Squad 13 Lieutenant Rukia Kurosaki Nekukaki, Ichigo's official wife, but that was a political matter. One that worked out well for us." Rukia returned as she forced her sorrow back down. "What brings this visit?" "I wanted to see her," Asdeath answered, looking down on the former lieutenant. Everyone spoke highly of her, for her personality above all else. Soldiers that bring up moral are sometimes more vital than their superior officers. It's why, when I was a general, I made sure to keep up moral among my men. Though, admittedly not always through moral means. If Ichigo didn't make me a soul reaper, I'd be bound for hell, but he broke me down and built me back up." "You said you were a general," Rukia said, choosing to focus on that and not Asdeth's admission that she was a terrible person. "Did you lose any soldiers you were close to?" "3. My elite officers, I lost them all on a mission I assigned to them," Asdeth admitted, thinking back to the day she lost her 3 beasts. "Whenever a soldier of mine died, I would make sure their families were cared for if I could help them. I didn't actually care, but I still repaid their loyalty. But if you're asking how I dealt with their losses, I just accepted it and moved on. I grew on the philosophy of, the weak die and the strong survive. Ichigo taught me the hard way what someone truly strong can do. But there were still things I just had to accept I couldn't change and focused on what I can do. Rukia took a moment to think about Astetha's words, remembering that there is something that she and her future sister wives could do. Come with me. You're meeting the rest of the harem. Rukia demanded, grabbing Astetha's hand and pulling her along. There is another one of our sisters that's missing in action and she needs rescuing. Back with the Zero Squad. Now, I'm alright with leaving. Ichigo said as the Tenhyurin was being prepped for launch by the Shiba attendants. How did it feel to actually make yourself useful for once, Tenjiro? The hot spring medic growled, still covered in dirt and grime from digging over a dozen new holes, while Kisuke and Retsu took the formulas of his healing springs and made them useful. The part that he was most annoyed with was that he actually felt inspired to create new springs and healing techniques but was forced to dig the holes. I forgot what it was like to cook for so many people. Kiryu cheered, still slim from all the cooking she did. I'm still annoyed that Hiyori wasn't around. I miss her. It was embarrassing to think that such uniforms were the standard. Senjimura groaned, her skeletal hands rubbing each other. I can't remember the last time I had to make so much so fast. Why are so many so foolish? Even after you telling them the truth. Urtsu wept as he clung to Ichigo. It just hurts, man. Although that rookie alas is getting real close to getting her Bankai, and that Kenpeka fellow. I think you're the only one with a better relationship. Let's get a move on, everybody. Ichibe interrupted as they all loaded up in the pillar transport with only the captains and some lieutenants there to bid them goodbye. Goodbye, try to hold out until we send Ichigo back down. He told everyone with a cheery smile. Also, Kiraku, I expect him to be released. Tokinata Tsunayashiro will be a great asset to the war. Kiraku nodded obediently. Don't worry, Asho. Lord Tsunayashiro will be released. The new captain commander answered as the Zero Squad loaded up and were launched back to the royal realm. You'd best keep your oath, Ichigo. The old monk told the teen as they rode the pillar back to the realm above Soul Society. I'd hate to put in this much effort to prepare you only for you to fail in killing that brat. Ichigo smiled confidently to the monk. Don't worry. The next time I see Wiwak will be the last. You might not even see it happen. Ichibe laughed at Ichigo's confidence, not knowing how serious the hybrid was. Chapter 103, The Final Battle Begins. Soul Society. A grim tone hung in the air of the Soul Society as the hours of the night slowly bled away to the coming dawn, with the next round of the war coming up. Soul Society had lost many soldiers and several notable officers, while the Quincy had lost half their main force, with their elites having proven to be far harder to kill, to say nothing about the possibility of Wiwak taking to the field while Ichigo was still in the royal realm. His presence in the forge apparent to all that listened by the clang of a hammer and the roar of fire that rang throughout the afterlife. It was to this melody that the final preparations were made. The clanging of steel that rang as Zaraki and Byakuya left the hospital, determined to see the war through. The roar of fire as Rukia gathered her sister wives with the intentions of going to get Senna, who was still in the world of the living, to plan their rescue of Halibel. The ringing of the hammer falling drummed through the air as Nozomi armed her latest soldier model Mod Souls and Regei, blank grey androgynous humanoids with implanted military training and musculature, with anti-Quincy guns made from the leftover hollow Reishi after the failure of the bombs. The explosions of heat that washed over the realm as Kiraku made his way to a special prison where another vile soul remained hidden. The timed beats of the forging as Kisuke and Mayuri watched Tenjikin set into the mechanical heart that now laid in Chad's chest. The ticking of the clock was replaced with these timed strikes as Ryujinjaka was remade for its new master. The moment Ichigo and Urtsu had reached the smith's palace, Zanjitsu rose from the Asashi pit holding a small handful of dimly glowing embers, the remaining life force of the once mighty Ryujinjaka. Wasting no more time, Ichigo and Urtsu went down to the forge and immediately got to work mixing in the broken remains of the Zanpakuto with the new spirit. With every strike of the forging hammer the fire and heat of the Zanpakuto grew, building up until it was a raging inferno. Eventually the heat grew so intense that even the smith's Zanpakuto forge girls couldn't withstand it and his hammers kept melting, but the blade wasn't complete. Ichigo took the fury of the forge and held the billet still with his bare hands, ignoring the fire and heat that ate away at his body, while Urtsu suffered right along with him to shape the blade. The air of the royal realm was set ablaze as Urtsu tossed away another destroyed hammer, his sixth one, and the palaces within the realm started to blacken from the heat as the blade was finally started taking its new shape. The two Shinigami at the core of the forge powered through, even as their skin cracked, peeled, and blistered from the fire that threatened to reduce both of them to ashes in an instant, all to finish this new and terrifyingly powerful blade. Within the inner world of the hybrid a new spirit started to take form, starting out as a fading candlelight before rising as a towering inferno. Those flames then slowly compressed into a burning resemblance of Yamamoto from his final days of life and grew progressively younger as the blade was hammered out. Eventually the fire started to change color, shifting within the original orange and red fire was flames of blue, black and white. Soon the visage of Yamamoto disappeared completely as well as it became a figure of fire. At the same time the forge exploded with such intensity that everything in the royal realm cracked and splintered with multiple places erupting into flames and the Soul Society gained what seemed like a sun in the middle of the night. The inside of the forge was still melting fast from the sheer heat of the newly finished blade, Ichigo trying desperately to bite back the pain from his right arm burning in the flames that engulfed it. A sheath materialized, almost at the same time, in Ichigo's left hand as he struggled to contain the power and wrath of his new blade. With great effort he slid the blade into its container and the flames were all extinguished, though he was still in the middle of what may as well have been an active volcano, molten stone having replaced the floor. His regenerative abilities were beginning to run out as his flesh continued to burn and melt in the forge as it cooled at a glacial pace. His arm was still cloaked in flames until the Zanpakuto girls stormed in. The next few moments were a blur as they took Ichigo and Uratsu out of the forge, both half dead from the process, and sent them to Tenjiro's palace to recover. Unfortunately all the moisture in the royal realm and entirety of Soul Society was burned away upon the blade's completion and Tenjiro had to make do with standard healing methods while his subordinates restored the springs. As Ichigo began to black out, one word sounded out in his mind. The name of his new sword. Kagutsuki. Squad 15 Barracks. A garganta opened in the underground base of the Shinigami squad in the world of the living, soon revealing Orium, Rukia, and Nilil. Most of the sister wives were already in Soul Society with the exception of Senna, so whilst Death got familiar with her new family and began planning the attack, Rukia, Nell, and Orium would bring in the bubbly member of the 15th Division. The only Shinigami that remained were trainees, Ishine, Hiri, Lisa, and Senna herself, and all of them were groaning in pain from being twisted and broken. What happened? Orium whispered in shock before sending out her healing shield to try and heal as many as she could. Rukia and Nell began investigating the area, finding trace amounts of Reishi from a powerful individual while the damage gave Rukia some idea on who attacked. Hiri. Orium's sudden cry brought the attention of the Shinigami and the Aaron car back to her, finding the wizard twisted in a rather horrid manner. Orium immediately began healing her as the tomboy's eyes fluttered open, weak, and already trying to close again. Watch, sir, Veil, Lance footage. She managed to groan out before passing out again. The girls shared a glance before nodding and each one said about their unspoken tasks. Orium would continue healing, Nell would gather the injured, and Rukia would find the video recording. The Squad 13 lieutenant found her way to Hiri's surveillance room and set about finding the footage of the attack. When she did she let the video play out, showing her the image of the many trainees, the officers that remained to keep things peaceful, and a hooded figure that appeared from a shadow. Pernida. Rukia gasped, recognizing the description she heard from other Shinigami that encountered the living hand. She continued to watch in horror as it appeared to make some demands, with a couple of the trainees attempting to intimidate it, before shooting something from the hood and started to horrifically twist their bodies. It wasn't enough to kill but more than enough to make one wish it had, clearly an intimidation tactic. Soon as Hine and Masaka stepped forward to initiate a counter-attack, Lisa, Hiri, and Senna trying to organize a retreat before the underground base started to twist and shift to cut off any exit. She continued to watch as Pernida and the Squad 15 leaders fought, with Lisa learning the hard way that being in close contact was a bad idea. The wizard tried stabbing the Quincy elite with her spear, only for it to snap into pieces with her right arm getting ripped off. It became a ranged battle after that as Masaki and the wizards used Ballas and Ceros against the hooded hand with this hind burning away the tendrils that kept sprouting from the Quincy with Injetsu. It worked for the first 3 times before Injetsu's flames became ineffective, not even leaving the tentacles smoking as they touched him and began to twist his body into an unrecognizable shape. His did manage to fire a fiery Getchuga at the Quincy and burned away the coat to reveal the giant left hand. The sight stunned Hiyori and Masaki, leaving them open to Pernita's attack and slowly twisting them to the point of breaking. Damn it! Where's the audio? Rukia cursed as she tried in vain to get the sound to come on, only to yield failure as the result as she kept watching. Pernita was 1 inch away from snapping Masaki's neck when it froze and turned its attention on Yuzu and Karen, who made their appearance. They started telling the hand something and it started to become an argument, Pernita coming close to killing Masaki and his hind before the twins drew their Zanpakuto. Much to Rukia's surprise, they made no move to attack the Quincy elite but got ready to cut their own throats. That made Pernita stop everything it was doing. The twins yelled something else and Pernita, reluctantly, set Masaki and his hind down before creating a shadow portal. There was a pause before the giant left hand squeezed through the portal, with Karen following it and Yuzu doing the same once Karen was through and the portal closed. No, oh no! Rukia groaned in horror. Did they, really? It appeared to the lieutenant that Yuzu and Karen had sacrificed themselves to save the members of Squad 15, but they were probably the targets in the first place. Which meant that Waiwak was planning to use them against Ichigo in some way. Once again, her husband's sisters were being used against him. It can't be the same. Aizen wanted a distraction. Waiwak doesn't have the means to do the SA, wait. No. She wanted to be wrong, but everything she heard about the Quincy Emperor indicated that he would do just what she was thinking. Need to get back. Nell. Orium. We're going. She shouted as she burst out of the room, where she found emergency response teams from Squad 4 led by Ryukin gathering the injured with help from the Exorcist and Aaron Carr. What is it? Orium asked, taking a break after restoring his hind, Masaki, and Senna. Is it about Yuzu and Karen? Rukia nodded in affirmation. We need to warn Ichigo. Now. Rukia turned to Ichigo's uncle, who held up a hand. I've already done my part. Ryukin told the Shinigami. Uriah has what he needs and I'm helping to heal these people. This is the extent of my actions, I don't fight. Rukia growled in frustration as Nell opened a Garganta and her group left. Ichigo, you must be careful. The hybrid's wife thought as they ran as fast as they could back to Soul Society. Your sisters' lives depend on your control. Siritii, unmarked prison. Kiraku made his way down to the lone cell of this particular prison. It was in the middle of nowhere, one-way access, with the number of people that were supposed to know about it being able to fit on one hand, made specifically for one person and one alone. The current captain commander gripped the fragile key in his pocket as he made his way down to the only prisoner in this lonely jail. Well, it seems I have a visitor. The lone occupant said as Shunsui made it to his destination. I was getting really bored lately, so thank you for coming. The man inside was Tokinata Tsunayashiro, the head of the Tsunayashiro clan and the most politically powerful person in the whole of Soul Society. He had a slender frame and long unkempt green hair from his imprisonment, with a loose white robe reserved for criminals. Next to him were a few magazines and a cup of ice cream that was fresh, nothing that he was allowed to have in this prison cell. So, I hear I'm getting released? He asked with a cruel smile. The Tsunayashiro clan was a member of the 4 noble houses, if not the leader of the noble houses themselves. The duty of the Tsunayashiro was to keep the history of Soul Society, but that was mainly to keep the original sin a secret. How Soul Society was built on lies, as the original founders of the noble houses made the Soul King into what he is, sealing him in crystal and tearing him to pieces to limit his power before splitting the realms and creating the cycle of life and death millions of years ago. It was the Tsunayashiro that made this happen, and Tokinata that decided that this knowledge should allow him to become one of the most vile people in Soul Society. He made an effort to cause pain and misery in others, delighting in their suffering, with Tuan being among his victims. However, his status as a noble kept him to just a light sentence of being discharged from the Godai. This changed after the Bakuto incident and the nobility purge, when Yamamoto had him and other detrimental elements arrested. Looks like there's a new captain commander. So why did the old man finally croak? Tsuyashiro sneered as he walked up to his prison bars. Because of his stupid pride, pathetic sense of honor, or was he just weak? The entire cell was made of Sekizeki stone, with the man himself wearing 2 riot-suppressing shackles on his wrists and ankles, leaving him powerless. Doesn't matter, the orders of a dead man are meaningless. Now open this door. Kiraka scoffed and said with a smile. Nah. I don't think I will. The look of surprise on the usually haughty noble was quite a sight of the captain. See, the original plan with you was that if Tuan returned to the Godai, then he'd be your executioner. But that didn't happen, and we just forgot you were here, till the old monk reminded me you existed. The noble then scowled at Kiraka with a look that promised a slow and painful death. You're under orders of the highest authority of the Shinigami to free dash. The orders of a dead man are meaningless. Shunsui interrupted with a dark smile of his own, shocking Tokinada once again. Change is coming, the old soul society will fade, and people like you are not needed. I could kill you myself, but a certain hybrid can ensure your eternal damnation, so I'll leave it to him. After he ends this war. The captain commander left before Tsunayashiro could do more than yell angrily, and when he exited the prison he blasted the entrance with a Hado spell to cause a cave-in before covering it in illusions. The new era approaches. Squad 12, Jiken Development Wing, Regai/Mod Soul Department. You did good yesterday, Frankenstein. Nozomi said as she continued to patch up the Berserker Regai model. As the Quincy attacked the day before, a few went to the R&D departments where Kisuke and Mayuri dealt with many of them, but a few reached her department. She then unleashed the Frankenstein sisters, as many were calling the faux humanoids made from recycled parts from other Regai bodies. There was nothing beautiful about the display, as the Saber and Berserker Frankensteins just raged across the battlefield, powering through everything to smash or slash anything that was Quincy related. The Saber model actually was more careful than the Berserker model, hence why she needed repairs. She was reconnecting the last few nerves when she got some visitors. So, is this where those artificial souls are made? The green-haired researcher looked over to the door to find the foreign heroes, sans Karna, who was still recovering from his fight. Achilles was looking at the various Regai with different levels of excitement, while Cu Kalane and Atlanta kept their focus on Nozomi as she finished her maintenance work. How does it feel? Nozomi asked the mute Regai, prompting the Berserker to get off the operating table and moved her arms to check. She nodded and grunted in approval with her creator's work, making the Verdette smile. You the one that defended this place? Achilles asked as he walked up to the scientist and Regai. Not bad, Missy. High five. The Greek said, holding his hand up to the girl, and waited for her to return it. Nozomi did nothing but watch as the silence got awkward and Achilles slowly reached for Frankenstein's hand to clap it. The Berserker was still confused but seemed to somewhat understand the matter, raising her hand and slammed her hand against the Greek hero's chest. The force of the impact sent him flying and through the walls of the building. Guess that can pass for the strength test. Nozomi said while Cu was laughing his ass off. Royal Realm, with Ichigo. The hybrid walked to the edge of the entrance platform, looking down the path that led back to the Soul Society. The stairs manifested, but he did not need them, he'd be flying down. Kagutsuka grew hot on his hip, creating a haze in the air around it as the sword radiated bloodlust. Particularly against that man that broke him and killed his previous partner, who knew swords could carry such a grudge. Soon. I promise. Ichigo said, dropping a hand to the hilt of the Zanpakuto. His skin immediately began to burn from the heat, smoke rising from his palm even as the sword began to cool down. He may have the power of fire now, but that did not mean he could fully control it, and Kagutsuka was filled with too much rage to help him beyond ending the Quincy Emperor. When it finally cooled down, Ichigo looked to his hand as it regenerated from the third-degree burns. As it healed, he flexed his arm as it flashed a golden light to reveal chains around his forearm, the links shimmering with golden light. The so-called Chain of Heaven, a final gift from his time in the other world as he thought back to how he got it. Flashback. I can help you with that. The hybrid heard a voice call out to him after an intense battle with the Quincy that was named Gilgamesh after his claimed ancestor. I am the first king and hero of man, the true Gilgamesh. The voice said as Ichigo looked at the apparition, a head of golden hair with ruby red eyes and a body that looked sculpted from marble. He wore baggy pants, golden shoes, and a gold gauntlet on his arm with an ornate axe and stone tablet hanging off a golden belt. How are you here? Ichigo asked, trying to comprehend how an ancient king could contact him from another realm and with thousands of years between them. Ignorant mongrel! The king suddenly yelled, surprising the tired hybrid. I studied and mastered magic at the peak of its existence in the time when gods walked among mankind. This is merely clairvoyance and projection. Now, I've seen your future and what you aim to do. But, you will need greater help if you wish to succeed. To which, I am permitting you this. He said before Ichigo's arm flashed with golden light and chains were now wrapped around his left arm. This is my most precious treasure, named after my one and only dearest friend. The Chain of Heaven, Inkiju. The hybrid grabbed onto the chain and gave an experimental tug, feeling the power within it. These feel different than what your descendant used against me. Ichigo noted with Gilgamesh nodding knowingly. As much as I want to keep it locked away in my treasury, never to be seen or touched by any other unworthy hands, your mission is too important. I've sent my precious treasure to you in my present so that no one else could use it. Killing the parasite that dares to call himself king and restoring a dead king, you have a long and difficult road, boy. The spirit of the ancient king held out his hand and the sword Ie flew to his grasp. But know this, mongrel, you only have one shot. Gilgamesh said, glaring at Ichigo and making the hybrid feel the true power of the real ancient king. I will not suffer my precious friend to be misused and will have it back in my treasury for good. Ie served its purpose in letting me know when it was time to send this message, now to seal it away so that no other filthy hand touches it. The ancient king began to fade before saying one last thing. Good luck, Ichigo Kurosaki. Flashback end. What the? Ichigo was brought out of his thoughts when he sensed something off in the Soul Society, like it was changing. He didn't know how to describe it, but the only thing that mattered was the one person he sensed. Why whack? The hybrid growled with venom before grabbing Kyoka Suijutsu. Bankai, Kagami no Bunyad no Tsukiakari no Nishoku. He quickly chanted while unsheathing the Kido Zanpakuto. The blade evaporated into a mist while the world around him rippled like a lake that had just been disturbed. The next thing that happened was Ichigo jumping off the Royal Realms platform and flying to the Siritii, or rather Silburn, as Waiwak made his next move. Chapter 104, Ascension. The Siritii/Silburn. Shock reigned supreme among the Shinigami as darkness seemed to burn away reality itself, replacing the familiar Japanese architecture with buildings that resembled ice and stone of a European design. Even a number of the captains were surprised by the change in the world around them, though a few retained their composure. Mayuri watched the change with indifference before digging out a remote switch and pressing the button on it, flooding the Shinigami R&D with light and preventing the loss of valuable equipment. The Soul Reapers were desperately trying to regain their bearings to repel the inevitable attack but were too slow as spirit arrows began raining down on them from all directions no matter where they were. It didn't help matters that Leal, Pernida, and Gerard were already going on the full offensive. The abominable form that Leal called Divine was already firing beams of light and tearing the Silburn apart to kill the Shinigami that fled from him. Despair and rejoice, Soul Reapers! Leal spoke with a booming voice as he fired continuously to bring down destruction in total apathy to who died under his assault. For now your holy cleansing has come and your sins shall be burned away by the light of God. These are the holy words of his chosen prophet. While the stern Ritter did busy himself to his mission of destruction, he was not blind to the lone-robed figure with a simple black broadsword that stood upon a tower at eye level with the Quincy. There is only so much heresy one can suffer to hear. The man known as Hassan said to the prophet who stopped to study the man that was not a Soul Reaper. My mood has already been soured by the loss of a dear friend of mine and you dare to speak of your blasphemous mission as pure and noble before me? Leal's owl head tilted in confusion at the old man's words. Do you not see my pure light? Are you not awed by my divine form? The sensuar beast asked while readying more beams of light. I am the first stern Ritter, the closest to his majesty, a truly divine existence, and you dare call me blasphemous? You are the heretic here, old man. There is no greater heresy than to preach of salvation while only bringing damnation. Hassan returned as blue fire engulfed his being. Though your faith is to be commended, you will find no salvation on this path for you will die here by my blade. Leal actually laughed while Hassan's robes turned into black armor and a horned skull became his face. There is no power or weapon that can slay me, foul sinner. The Quincy roared out, holding out his arm and firing a beam of light that was split in half by Hassan's blade, with the man himself still glowing a bright blue. You knew of no such blade or power because you had yet to meet me, the assassin said while repositioning his sword for another swing. So attend, false prophet, and know my name. From the mountain's abyss, I come, and only death do I bring. I am the old man of the mountain, the first Hassan Isabag. A skull of ghostly blue fire flashed before he jumped at Leal, the thing backing away at the instinctual sense of fear before thrusting his head forward with a ball of light gathering above his eye. Nothing can harm me, the Quincy yelled out before firing at the Hassan, who proceeded to cleave the beam with his sword. The next thing that Leal knew was pain as vision from the right side suddenly turned black, followed by pain on his left as he felt himself losing his wings on that side and falling to the ground with a shaky landing that knocked him off balance. Your flight, omniscient sight, and holy light shall all be cleaved by my might. Leal turned his good eye to the armored Hassan, raising his hand to summon his ultimate attack as one thing coursed through his veins. Fear, a sensation he thought he had long since lost. While the Quincy kept Hassan in his sight, the assassin suddenly vanished, completely and utterly vanished, terrifying Leal before he felt cut and slashed all over his being as he screamed out in agony. The Hassan moved so quickly and silently that all anyone could see were lines of blue slashing the stern ritter to pieces. At the end of it every limb was severed, never to be restored. The Quincy was blinded by his eyes being slashed open, and his wings were just gone. You, foul sinner. Leal managed to growl while listening to the armored footsteps of the Hassan, footsteps he allowed the Quincy to hear. How dare you strike at God's prophet? I have already said why. King Hassan said, standing before the owl face and serpentine neck of Leal Barrow. An all too perfect final cut for an executioner. Only death do I bring, he said before immediately beheading the elite Quincy. With Shunsui. Well, there goes most of our major traps and countermeasures. The current captain commander sighed as the whole of the Siridi was replaced with the Silburn. Should have tried to restore that barrier instead, make it harder for them to break in. Naneo, send word to start Plan Severance. Both Naneo and himself held their cool while footsteps alerted them to a new presence, turning to find Jugram and Uriu. Anything new? There's no reason to assume that His Majesty doesn't already suspect us, Uriu immediately said. We've done everything we could to try and keep him in the dark, but I don't know how much he actually knows. We've been operating under the idea that he knows and has just been biding his time this whole while, Jugram added. He does not have his true sight yet, so he can't use it without crippling his still loyal forces. They were interrupted by the sounds of brakes and crashes, turning to see a giant of light laying waste to the city. And no, it wouldn't do any good against him. That's unfortunate. Kiraka sighed as he unsheathed Katan Kyakotsu. Well, let's try to keep up appearances. Jugram brought out a sword and shield while Uriu manifested a new bow. And if everything works out, Wywak will still lose out on a trump card. The three combatants immediately attacked each other while Naneo went about her part and starting Severance with a quick message to the one in charge of it. With Rukia. The Vizard Lieutenant watched as the Siridi and Silburn switched places with each other with the rest of her sister wives, each one immediately going to their strongest state to get ready for battle. Nilil turned into her Hogyaku enhanced form and Orium brought out all of her spirits while the Shinigami girls activated their Shikai, with Rukia donning her hollow mask and Tatsuki activating an aura around herself. Rukia immediately drew a circle around the group with her Sode no Shirayaki as they were quickly surrounded by Quincy, who had yet to fire a single shot. Well. They looked up to find Bambietta and Candace looking down on them, both wearing smug expressions. If it isn't Ichigo's many girlfriends. Looks like a couple are missing though, the Explode said, keeping a cocky smirk on her face. Well, we do have that filthy hollow in our prison over there, Candace said, pointing a thumb over to what looked to be a palace. The other one, with the really big tits, she's dead. The casual dismissal ignited an anger in most of the girls that knew Rangiku and were still hurting from her passing, while Rukia and Esdeath saw Bambietta and Candace send them a subtle wink. Ma'am, why are we taunting them instead of killing them? One of the soldats asked while Rukia ready to dance. Oh please, what can they do? Some no mai, Tsukishiro. Rukia called out, creating a giant ring of ice between them and the Quincy, and trapping themselves within. Orium, Senna, wind barrier. Asteth dash. Already on it. The blue-haired sadist said as she stabbed her Tsundere Akuma into the ice while Orium had the wind spirit Ventus create a dome above their heads with Senna helping with her Morokumaru. They heard the cackle of electricity immediately before a large lightning bolt slammed against the barrier of wind, dispersing the electricity before Senna changed the flow of wind to concentrate the power and turn her staff into a lightning blade. This should be good. She smirked, looking over her new weapon. Soon the wall of ice surrounding them exploded, a result of the bombardment of Reishi arrows and Bambietta's own unique ability. As the ice fell apart, Asteth took control of the fragments and shot them like a shotgun blast at the Quincy, tearing apart buildings and many of the Quincy soldats while the Sternritters dodged. Move! Rukia shouted as they all made their way toward the Quincy palace. Nell led the charge, the Reishi in her lance burning with power and spinning like a drill as she bulldozed her way on the ground and plowed through Quincy and buildings alike. Everyone else were jumping from rooftop to rooftop with their respective speed techniques. Rukia and Asteth used flash step to move about quickly, occasionally blasting beams of cold and ice to freeze Quincy or cutting through them as they passed. Asteth wore a bloodthirsty smirk as she indulged in every kill while Rukia held a look of determination. Orium and Senna were flying on wind currents with Bambietta and Candice following after them. The explode fired a barrage of Reishi bombs at the duo, but Orium used Terra and Aqua to create a barrier of rocks and ice to absorb the Reishi and explode harmlessly away from them while Tsubaki was getting ready to clip the wings of the Sternritter. Candice tried firing lightning, but Senna would always absorb it with her Morokumaru and would attempt to counter-attack the thunder with her own lightning attacks. Both sides weren't really aiming to hurt the other, but they had to make it seem like it was a serious battle. Tatsuki became like a ball of fire, surrounding herself in an aura that exponentially increased her speed and strength. It wasn't like Shunko, less powerful but more stable for her to use, and she used that to shoot around like a comet and hit like one as well. They continued their way toward the Silbern Palace, cutting their way through whatever soldat that got in their way, until they reached the palace gates with Nilil reaching it first with Rukia and Asteth showing up immediately after. "Is that her?" Rukia asked as they saw a woman in a Sternritter uniform as Tatsuki appeared with Orium and Senna continuing to run interference/distraction with Bambietta and Candice. Nell nodded with fury in her eyes at the Quincy responsible for taking her sister wife. The Sternritter was Berenice Gabrielle, a slender woman with pink chin-length hair going to purple on her right side and wore dark eyeshadow, and she was looking at the challenging Shinigami and Aaron with confidence. "Are you Desh?" she started before Nilil interrupted. "Ready to die?" There was no pause for any answer. Rukia and Asteth just immediately fired beams of ice that instantly froze the Sternritter, followed by a barrage of stone and ice that quickly exploded in a massive bolt of continuous lightning that was replaced with an equally massive column of fire, and all finished off with a powerful Zero from Nilil. The girls looked over the destructive evidence of their handiwork as Orium, Senna, Bambi, and Candice landed next to them. "I think we got her," Tatsuki said as they all ran inside, with the Sternritters leading the way. "Wywak is outside waiting for Ichigo to show up," Bambietta explained as they went through the winding corridors. "I think he was planning on using Haribel as a trap to lure in Ichigo while he ascends to the royal realm, but seems to have a different idea now. What that is, we don't know." Rukia bit her tongue, as if not saying what she fears would somehow prevent it from being what is. Besides, she couldn't feel Yuzu or Karen anywhere in the Silbern, so that meant either another separate dimension or they were cloaked by a much greater Ryotsu. "Down here," Candice called out as they suddenly turned and went down a few flights of stairs, coming to a corridor of prison cells. Passing many that had splotches of blood on the floor and walls, evidence of Wywaka's mercy, as they headed for one in particular. One that had a certain dark-skinned Aaron hanging by her wrists. "Tia!" Orium called out, ready to summon her healing shield before Nell held an arm out as she marched in front of the cell. "What are you doing here, Tia Haribel?" she asked in a rather harsh tone. "I doubted, my king," she answered, sounding utterly ashamed of herself. "Do you think he cares?" "I don't dash." "Do you think Ichigo cares?" Nell repeated, more forcefully. "I can't dash." "Who are you?" Some pathetic hollow that lucked out on becoming an Arankar, or a proper Vasto Lord. Are you loyal to the King of Hollows or are you nothing? Is your faith in your king so weak that you'd think he'd discard you over something so stupid? Who are you? Haribal began to glow yellow. I am Tia Haribal, knight and consort to His Majesty, the King of Hollows, Ichigo Kurosaki. I am his servant and I will sacrifice my everything to protect all he holds dear. Meaning, I will not die here. Haribal then exploded in a flash of light and transformed before them. Her blonde hair turned ashen gray and she gained rock-like black and gray armor on her knees and left wrist while her right arm was armored ending in a blade of reishi. Her chest was only covered by thin strands of yellow reishi and she gained shark fins and a tail that was burning with reishi with her hollow hole exposed where her womb would be with a sphere floating inside, showing that she was in her new Hogyaku enhanced form. I will die by my king's side, or not at all. She roared with power, tearing herself free of her prison to join her sisters. Now, let's go. I have to apologize to our husband. They all smiled, happy to have their family back, which was interrupted by the whole of the Silburn suddenly shaking. With Jin. The moment the Siriti began to shift, he was on the move. Jin had a mission, one that always seemed to define him no matter how much time had passed, and he was always determined to see it through no matter how long or what it would cost. Revenge. He waited for over 100 years to get his revenge on Aizen for hurting Rangiku, the only person he ever really cared about, and now he had a new target, the Quincy that killed her. He kept flashing around, already using his Bankai to quickly snipe the different Quincy that he passed along the way, constantly on the lookout for the stern ritter that matched the description Toshiro gave him. Narrow icy blue eyes, short black hair, and a scar on the left side of his mouth. Where is he? The silver-haired fox wondered as he stopped for a moment to scan his surroundings. He was brought out of his train of thought when he sensed an attack coming from behind, turning to find a large snake head comprised of reishi heading for him with several bright points reminiscent of licked Regan ready to fire at him. The Squad 16 captain raised his Zanpakuto while manifesting his fox-like hollow mask and brought it down while extending his blade to its limit as he charged a Zero in his other hand. He cut the serpent in half, making it fly around him harmlessly, but felt his blade stop. Is this blood vene? No. Too solid for that. Is this the iron? He thought while going over what intel they had managed to get, anything to help him find and kill the stern ritter responsible for Rangiku's death. He held out his Zero and fired it to wipe out the wall of arrows that were flying at him and to strike at the Quincy on the other side. He poured quite a bit of power into that blast but the arrows wore it down greatly, however it still served its purpose and provided a distraction. He immediately flashed to their location and got in front of the stern ritter, still bracing himself from the Zero. He wasted no movement, instantly analyzed how many Quincy were around them, and with his Kamishinai no Yuri, effortlessly killed them all before being stopped by the iron on Kangdu when Jin tried to cut off an arm. Hi there. Jin said in a friendly tone with a smirk and aura that radiated hate and murderous intent, the wizard's mask fading from his face. The stern ritter tried to jump back but found himself caught as Jin grabbed his coat and proceeded to force him into an armbar. I have a few questions. Heido number 11, Tsuzuri Raiden. The captain said before electrocuting the Quincy for a few seconds with the Kido he infused with hollow reishi, bypassing the stern ritter's defenses and making him cry out in pain. Now, question 1, do you remember any of the Shinigami you have killed? Really? The Quincy managed to breath out when the Kido ended so Jin could ask his question. Do you remember every Quincy you've slain Jin Ichimaru? You don't even care about your own allies. Jin's expression didn't change as he kept his smile. Yeah, I don't. He began electrocuting Kangdu once again, making him scream in pain again, and this time Jin stabbed his Zanpakuto into a non-vital area and slowly let his Bankai dissolve into Kang's body. But there is one that I care about, or rather, there was one that I cared about. So answer me, do you remember any Shinigami you've killed? Did I kill someone you cared about? Kangdu was in pain, but he was willing to suffer through it to try and escape. The idea was that he'd use his power to break off the Zanpakuto and leave Jin weaponless. Why should I care? Because quite a few people loved that person. Jin answered, twisting his blade in Kang's body. She was a friend, family, someone that made an effort to make others around her happy, a light in dark times. And you snuffed out that light. To King's shock, Jin pulled the blade out and tossed his Zanpakuto aside and changed his hold to grab him by the chin. And I'm the last person you'd want to find you. The silver-haired captain leaned in and whispered in the Quincy's ear. Yakuri Koros, Kamishinai no Yuri. And Jin released him, much to King's surprise again, but the stern Ritter refused to go back a failure a second time. You fool. King summoned his spirit claws and turned toward Jin, blood artery coursing through his veins. How about I help you reunite with your precious friend? He suggested before readying another attack, just as blood started dripping out of his nose, ears, and eyes. What? King started coughing up blood as he dropped to his knees, watching his body slowly dissolve. What did you do? He demanded as his body fell apart, Jin's friendly smirk never leaving his face. I simply used the true power of my Bankai, except I said to take its time in killing you. King dropped to his stomach, fear and shame filling his being as the realization of his death was finally dawning on him. He reached out for someone, anyone, he just wanted someone to help him. Jin responded by taking his hand and easily ripped it off, opening his eyes to look directly into the Quincy's. Her name was Matsumoto. Rangiku Matsumoto. Jin told him, now dropping his smile as he coldly watched King Do literally dissolve before his eyes. The left hand of the Soul King. Well, this is bad. Kisuk stated as he was soon surrounded by towering left arms, each one as tall as the buildings around them. I thought there were more of you, not that I'm complaining. He quickly reviewed the information that they had on the sentient limb, able to manipulate any solid matter that its nerves touch and can learn and adapt to whatever it touches. A difficult foe to combat but not impossible, and the mission here was to capture and contain Pernida, not to kill, which is much harder. I've some questions for you. Before we get started, do you have memories of when the Soul King was whole or do you not? Are you aware of the dangers Wiwak presents or do you simply not care? The hands looked to each other before one with two pupils in its eye palm leaned down to Urahara. No. I have no memories of this Soul King. Pernida Parncages was always Pernida. It said to the captain while the other hands had red nerves hanging from their fingertips and slowly making their way to the Kisuk. It is this arrogance of the Shinigami, to call the Quincy a danger, that led to this war. I didn't say the Quincy were a danger, I'm actually fond of the few Quincy I personally got to know. Kisuk quickly countered while taking out his Zanpakuto. I specifically said that Wiwak was the danger, not the Quincy. I personally prefer the chance for coexistence that was denied both sides. But for Wiwak, the Quincy only exists to further his petty goals, and that is what I'm insulting. Bankai, Kanan Bairiki Beniheimer Adam. The female mannequin form of his Bankai manifested just as the nerves reached his legs. He immediately jumped up as Pernida used his powers to twist and shift his legs into a bloody mess before they split open and were immediately restored. As he began to drop, he pressed a button on the heels of his shoes and small Reishi platforms appeared under his feet. Nice job, Mayuri. Kisuk thought as he looked at the confused Pernida. Did you copy my abilities? It asked before its copies began to split apart and get sewn back together, twisting around spastically as if they lost full control of themselves. It's similar, but not quite. Kisuk admitted before spinning around rapidly. Heido number 78, Zhang Aaron. From the edge of Beniheim came a blade of Kido that sliced the Pernidas, separating the top halves from the lower halves. Pernida actually grunted in pain as his head landed, Kisuk leaning in to examine his work. You know, for a sentient limb of a god, I was expecting a bit more. The moment he said that, the many clones immediately shot their nerves into Kisuk's body and tore him apart, dragging the chunks to their waiting maws. From someone considered a special war power by His Majesty, I was expecting a bit more. The main head taunted as it rose back to its full height, coming into eye contact with Kisuk and Mayuri as the latter was watching the clones with great interest. Thanks for your donations to science. Mayuri said with true thanks as the many different arms began to either rot or mutate. I've packed that decoy full of many different test drugs that I never thought I'd get the chance to use. So thank you for this. The main head severed itself from its body as the infection flowed to it before the bodies split open and seemed to expel all of the drugs. No matter what you do, I will overcome. Pernida began to say before its nerves began to shoot toward the main body and converge into a massive hideous blob of limbs and fingers. That bit of restructuring was a little tricky. The Squad 12 captain said as Tessai and Hachigen arrived, hands glowing as they activated a new Kido spell, Time Regression. Making your nerves return and attack you, it was hard. But Mayuri had the genius idea to make a virus out of his blood and nerve endings to create what he calls a marionette virus. Frankly, I only had a small window to actually use it, so my drugs were used to distract you. The amoral researcher added as the hideous blob shifted into its previous form of a sentient limb. But that now brings us here. The power of evolution, facing its natural counter, regression. Urahara continued as the Kido continued its work. But, I doubt it's important to tell you any of this now. Considering you're now just an arm. Pernida could say nothing, its pupils moving about dumbly as it failed to collect any information, immediately being reset with any amount of data erased. Mission accomplished. How's it going on the other end? The four looked to see Gerard now boxing against an equally giant entity with 6 arms while smaller light flew about the giant Quincy. The heart of the Soul King. Stay strong. Don't give up. Komamura roared, in a human form with long hair and furry forearms, as he used his Bankai, now without armor and looking quite demonic, to try and restrain the giant Gerard with its bolus and ropes. While other, more Kido and technique-oriented, Shinigami engaged in false battles with the remaining turncoats Turnritters and actual enemy Quincy, the heavy hitters of the Godii battled the heart of the Soul King as it continued to grow in size and might from all the damage. Stark, Grimjo, and Ulquiorra launched Zero after Zero at his head to keep him blind while everyone else attacked the body. Everyone else was acting in teams. Kenpeki and Anohana stayed closed together with the Squad 4 captain healing her husband as he tears apart his own body with his Bankai's power while they attacked the arms and chest. Kensei and Mashiro had their masks on and focused on the legs with Kensei using his Bankai, Tekken Tachikaze which took the form of knuckle blades and purple wrappings around his arms to protruding off his back, and letting the vibrations of his punches try to knock Gerard down. By destroying his legs with Mashiro attacking his knees, Yoryuki and Yusehiro clad in shunko of lightning and explosive flames focused on the joints of the behemoth. That left Komamura and Hisagi to try and restrain the Quincy with their Bankai, Hisagi's own Fushi no Kohyo taking the form of a noose made of chains leading to a large orb of tangled chains wrapped around his and Gerard's neck. Hisagi's true power was never an offensive power but a healing one, his Shikai's chain being able to heal him from any injury so long as he had the Ryotsu to spare and his Bankai automatically healed both him and his designated opponent until one of them ran out of Ryotsu. Using his Bankai, Hisagi negated Gerard's miracle ability by healing him before it activates and thus kept Gerard from getting any stronger. Unfortunately, Gerard seemed to have limitless Ryotsu so Hisagi had to abstain from fighting to make sure he kept Gerard in his noose. This was how the fight had been going since Gerard appeared and he was showing no signs of getting weaker. I'm running out of Ryotsu. Komamura thought as he growled while pulling on the spirit ropes. Damn it, should have expected this much from the Soul King's heart. He was facing Gerard's front while the others attacking pushed him back. Need a hand. Seijin took the chance to look to his side, seeing a shirtless Yasutaro with a metallic disc in his chest with the number 20 in digital lights in the center. My turn. Diablo Gigant, Azura. Chad said as he slammed his fists together, giving a low growl before shifting to a roar as his Reishi flared, rising to match the height of the Quincy before taking the shape of his giant devil form with 4 additional arms. La Muert. He said before throwing his attacking arms into Gerard's stomach, each sending a damaging pulse throughout the Quincy's body. The force of the blows lifted Gerard off the ground, forcing the Shinigami and Aaronkar to concentrate their attack on sending him back to the ground. You dem Soul Reapers! Gerard managed to yell out, sounding warped and layered like some inhuman thing, as he was dropped to his knees by the attack. He may have been as fast as he is strong, but his large size and the many distractions made him clumsy compared to the more agile forces attacking him. I'll kill every last one of you! He roared out, throwing a rather clumsy punch which Chad deflected before slamming another 3 fists into Gerard's chest, throat, and face. You're too used to use sword, shield, and arrows. Chad chided as Gerard attempted to attack him again only for the full bringer to bob and weave out of the way. You have no skill in hand-to-hand fighting. Chad proceeded to rapidly punch the giant Quincy in the face and chest with matching speed and power. Something I excel in. A punch was followed by a sickening crack. Because my fists are for protecting my comrades and I get plenty of practice. Chad's arms began to blur, leaving the Fullbringer unaware as Gerard speared his hand to the devil's side. Despite getting cut off by Zaraki and knocked off course by the Shihoan siblings, it still cut through Yasutara's side before healing. You say that, but none of your punches hurt. Gerard said as he tried uppercutting Chad before tackling him. Before either fell down, the Fullbringer brought all 6 hands together and slammed them down in the strongest hammer blow he's ever thrown, making the entirety of the Silburn/Siridi shake. The two continued to fight, giving some of the others fighting Gerard a chance to rest. Only a few people took notice of the hole appearing in the sky. Son of the Soul King. So you've finally arrived. The Quincy Emperor thought as a hole appeared in the sky, the man immediately turning his attention to the hybrid that came before him. Ichigo Kurosaka stood there, wearing some white armor bands crisscrossing over his body with red scale plating on his left shoulder and right hip, silently unsheathing a rather familiar Zanpakuto. Do you plan to honor Yamamoto by killing me with his sword? Or are you going to insult both him and myself by using inferior flames? Reduce all creation to ash, Ichigo said as the entire field was engulfed in fire. Ryujinjaka. Waiwak felt the heat of the flames that wrapped around the both of them, reaching out a hand and letting the flames lick his flesh before sighing in disappointment. I was actually hoping for something better. The Emperor said before creating a massive bow in the sky and shot down a large Reishi arrow in the form of a broadsword. But what should I expect from a broken sword? Ichigo slashed at the Quincy, sending a wave of intense flame which Waiwak cut through and dissipated, noticing that the hybrid disappeared from sight. The Quincy then noticed a glow from underneath him, making him jump aside as a pillar of flame erupted from where he stood. Then he sensed an attack coming from behind and turned to block a slash from the larger Zanjutsu blade. While he was held there, Ichigo's eyes glowed with power before firing 2 small Zero Cornea at the Quincy, striking him in the forehead and sending him back. Die, you bastard! The hybrid roared out as he pointed his blade at Waiwak and charged a Zero. Waiwak glared at the oncoming blast and caught it in his hand. At that same moment, he used Sclavere to tear apart the Zero and absorb it along with much of the surrounding area into a series of bows and arrows around Ichigo. I was expecting better out of you, he said before unleashing a barrage of spirit arrows at the hybrid, forcing Ichigo to block and deflect each one while Waiwak created a glowing X with a line through it on the ground and began levitating upward to the hole in the sky. But you did open the way for my ascension. I was expecting some to stand by my side, but how many of my children did you and that ungrateful brat turn against me? The attack ended and Ichigo looked tired, but not harmed. He was about to chase the Quincy Emperor before having to dodge more arrows, finding himself surrounded by Quincy in skull masks reminiscent of the Exequias that guarded the interior of Las Noches. I shall let them deal with you, Waiwak said as he passed through the opening in the sky, heading for the palace of the Soul King. In the meantime, I shall take what is rightfully mine. His hands glowed as he began to use his Auswallen to take away the powers he gave to the Vandenreich, leaving only one Sternritter and the 2 pieces of the Soul King as he attempted to strengthen Pernida, only to find something was wrong. All of his treasonous children still lived. Plan Severance. Jinjo was in Mayuri's private lab, monitoring hundreds of thousands of camera drones that were spread throughout the Silburn after the lieutenant activated the defense system to keep the R&D labs with them when the Quincy switched out the Siridi with their Silburn. The Fullbringer watched as they managed to restrain Pernida, kept Gerard at bay, and staged a dozen fake battles in an attempt to fool Waiwak while Tsukishima did his part of a risky gambit to save the majority of the Sternritter and weaken Waiwak. Tsukishima himself was connected to a machine that connected his life force with a tank full of artificial souls to take the heavier cost of a Fullbringer using the fullest extent of their respective abilities. Tsukishima's was called Scribe of Eternity and it seemed like whatever was written inside was made the truth. Members of the Vandenreich would think Uriah was an agent of theirs all along and now was what he did for Severance, writing that the Sternritters were no longer connected to Waiwak. The cost of using this power was severe but Tsukishima was willing to pay that price on the chance that it would work and from what Jinjo was seeing, it did. The Fullbringer's phone began ringing, prompting him to answer it. Yes, head captain, Severance was a success. Jinjo said as he answered his phone. It seems like the only Quincy left are those with the rank of, what the? He paused as Quincy Arrancar began swarming all around. Sir, are you seeing this? You mean the sudden army that's popping up everywhere? Yes. Kuraka responded. I'm scanning for a possible origin point. The man said as he spotted a tower that seemed to be taken over by a pure white plant of some kind with hundreds of thousands of budding skulls. Kiraku, there seems to be a tower that's growing them. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like Rudborn Kilut, one of the two main guardians of Las Noches. His resurrection was to gain branches from which he'd spawn soulless soldiers. Seems like Waiwak liked this power and gave him an upgrade. Do I need to head out? If you want, but I think Shinji can handle this. Then I guess I'll stay here. I need to say goodbye anyways. Jinjo said as he hung up, turning to behind him where Tsukishima lay dead. Sorry that this happened. I was hoping for something happier, like we'd go out into the world and find more Fullbringers together. He got out of his chair and over to his friend, looking at the device that was supposed to protect him but only lasted long enough for Tsukishima to severely weaken Waiwak. Hopefully it was enough, but Hashwalth thinks they're running out of time before Waiwaka's eyes open. Whatever that meant. I'm gonna miss you, kid. Goodbye. The former substitute Shinigami said as he took Tsukishima's book and bookmark. But I'll always remember you. Elsewhere. The whole of the Siri/Silburn erupted into chaos from the sudden explosion of the Quincy Arrancar, attacking anyone they came across in a mad frenzy. Omada took this chance to finally cut loose, unleashing all the anger and hate he was feeling from his captain's death upon the enemy, slamming the spiked ball of his Gaget Subari into one Arrancar after another while flashing about the field with speed befitting the lieutenant of the 2nd Division. Byakuya was in the center of a pink hurricane of blades while Renji took out the few stragglers that evaded his captain's wrath. Toshiro shot out waves of ice and frost, instantly freezing and killing anything in his path while Bazby unleashed torrents of flame at the same time. All the Sternritter were using a mix of their archery and shrifts to hold off the swarming enemy. Lil Tato ate dozens with every bite, Minias bulked up and crushed any that got too close, and Giselle was reanimating each Arrancar Quincy that was still together enough to be a useful zombie to them. Some treating this like a battle for survival while others embraced the chaos and just had fun with it. 38. 41. For I'm starting to think I'm losing count. Achilles yelled out as he continued swinging his spear in wide arcs and cutting down multiple Quincy Arrancar with each one. You just got to 53 and rising. Cu Kulane yelled out while still swinging his own spear and casting multiple fire spells. I'm at 82, Atlanta's at 106. Atlanta fired another 4 arrows at once. 110. You guys are still playing. The Huntress roared as they continued to fight. And seriously? I know why I can keep track, but you? That's impressive. The Irish warrior shrugged his shoulders. My master was incredibly rough but effective. Cu answered, looking over to find Scat Hatch sitting atop a 20-foot-tall pile of bodies and casually waving at him. Very effective. He turned to return to his fights to find Ikeku swinging his massive blades with an aura of draconic claws around them. Mind if I join this game? He asked with a savage grin. With Shinji. You want me to use my Bankai? The Vizard captain of Squad 5 yelled into his cell phone while Momo used her Shikai to shoot down any of the Quincy Arrancar with Robert Acutron using Reishi pistols to do the same. Are we even sure that might work? The target seems to be an Arrancar named Rudborn Kilut, Kiraku answered over the phone. It isn't an army, it's one person that can create drones to fight for him. Get to him and the rest will follow. There was a pause as someone spoke but Shinji couldn't hear it, having to fight a few that got close while Kiraku did the same on his side. Hashwalth says that Rudborn was reborn as Sternritter L, the Legion. Happened after the attack on Las Noches and he wasn't told until after the first attack ended. So they took the Arrancar that could make an army and cranked that to 1,000. Shinji looked to the tower where all the Quincy Arrancar were coming from. Then ripped off the dial? Maybe I am the only one that can stop this. Not without backup. Shinji turned to find Rose, Izuru, Lisa, Hiyori, Ishine, and Masaki. They all had determined looks and there was no time to argue. Shinji had to move in quickly. "Once I get to that tower, get away as fast as you can," he said before flashing away with everyone else following after him. Shinji focused only on reaching the tower while the others kept the drones off his back until he landed at the top of the tower. Once his feet touched down, a flower-like construct formed from beneath him while his ringed sword turned into a ringed staff. "Bankai, Sakashima Yakoshima Hapa Fusagari," he said as the sounds of battle ended, replaced with the sounds of flesh being cut, crushed, torn, and burned. "Guess it worked," Shinji said, releasing a breath he was holding before looking around and finding Rudborn, or what became of him. The man was now literally the trunk of a tree that had roots entangling the entirety of the tower they were on. "Protect, must, protect." It was quiet but Shinji still heard it wheezing out of Rudborn's throat. The wizard took a closer look at the Aaron car to see what was done and the cracks on his mask and scars on his scalp made it clear that Rudborn didn't betray his master willingly. If the torture didn't make him turn then cutting out some chunks of his brain turned him into enough of a puppet for Waiwaka's whims. Just enough of his head was left to keep him alive with the new resurrection cannibalizing everything else. "You poor bastard," the wizard whispered before quickly snapping the Aaron car's neck. With that action the tree and vines began to break apart into dust along with all the drones. "Well, that's that then," Shinji said before disabling his Bankai. It was a troublesome power, inverting a person's idea of friend and foe. Could turn best friends into mortal enemies and vice versa, but it never changed anyone's personality so if that person had no problem attacking an ally then he'd still be vulnerable. Shinji got ready to move when 3 pillars of light struck down, one at where Pernida was fighting Kisuke and his team, one on Gerard, and finally one at where the Shinigami R&D building was. "With Uryu." "So, he's starting?" the Quincy asked, looking right up into the sky as the 3 targets began to ascend. Pernida, the left hand of the Soul King, Gerard, the heart, and Mimi Heiji, the right hand. Those were the main targets of the pillars of light as they slowly climbed into the heavens. He was surprised to hear that Yukatake kept one of the limbs inside his body, sustaining him to live as long as he did, but it was time to return it. With Mayuri making a set of replacement organs, Yukatake could expect to live a longer life, but at the cost of being crippled from combat duty. Not a bad time to retire, Uriah thought as Ichigo's double walked up next to him. "Yes. Guess he felt like waiting," the double said before shimmering to reveal herself as Kyoka Suijutsu. "But no, he's calling. Are you ready?" Uriah reached into his pocket to feel 2 important blades that he got from his father before this war started. He nodded, keeping his gaze locked on the closing gates of the royal realm. "Then hang on." The humanoid form faded away, leaving only the Zanpakuto sword that Uriah grabbed onto before it shot toward the sky. Chapter 105, Revival. With the Zero Squad. "Here he comes," Setsunamaru said as she and the other members of the Zero Squad gathered on a single disc, the one that would serve as the intended battlefield for the hybrid and the Parasite King. "And yet, Ichigo still hasn't joined us here." She seamstress looked back to the royal palace where Ichigo remained for reasons unknown to the rest of the Zero Squad. "That brat talks a big game, has the nerve to insult us, claims he'll take on Waiwaka alone, and where is he? Chickening out like a little bitch." Tenjiro growled, letting out his anger at the hybrid that was growing ever since they went down to the Siriti. "For someone that even we acknowledge, he seems pretty intent on letting us down. If nothing else, Ichigo is a man of his word." Ichibe said as Waiwaka climbed ever higher. "He said that he'll kill that brat. I believe his words were in fact, the next time I see him will be the last, ... Though he did also say that I might not see that fight." What did he mean by that? As Ichibe thought that, pillars of light appeared and shot toward the Siriti. "No, he can't," the monk shouted as he realized what Ichigo was attempting to do. "Stay here. If Waiwaka arrives, keep him busy." With no other explanation, Ichibe Hyasub flashed toward the royal palace and into the inner chambers where the Soul King resided. "What the heck was that?" Uritsu asked while holding a new failure in hand, a stronger Seifushi than the one Ichigo destroyed in their spar so long ago. "What is that boy doing anyway?" The smith's eyes then moved to follow a Zanpakuto that was also flying toward the royal palace with Urayu Ishida in tow. "I don't know, but we don't have time to ponder that anymore," Kiryu said as a beam of light appeared before them, with the Quincy Emperor coming out. Kiryu immediately activated a Kido that made the entire ring they stood on sprout a cage of trees that enveloped them and their opponent. The Emperor stepped out onto the battlefield calmly, looking over the royal guard of his father. "You seem to be missing a member," Waiwak said while the Zero Squad themselves got ready for a fight. "Do you really believe you can beat me with the four of you? It seems I was too generous in waiting this long." Waiwaka's eyes that started to gain more pupils. "My eyes have finally opened." Throne room of the Soul King. The room had only two occupants, the Soul King himself, trapped in an amber crystal seal with slicked back black hair, 4 black irises in his eyes, and a gaunt body with no limbs that showed the measure of his mutilation, and Ichigo Kurosaki who stood before the prison with the Hogyaku floating before him and shining like a rainbow star while the hybrid himself was clad in his golden hollow armor and in his Bankai state of Tensā Zanjutsu. Ichigo summoned the sphere to his being shortly after throwing Kyoka Suijutsu down to the Silburn to open the way for Waiwak and was using it to grant his new wish, the restoration and revival of the Soul King. In response to that one wish, portals had appeared around the crystal prison of the Soul King with glowing orbs flowing from those portals and into the entity himself. The process had started out slow but was getting faster with every passing second, like the Soul King was willing himself back to full life. The hybrid would have been content to just stand by and wait for the process to finish, but he knew that something would try and interfere with this mission. Bakudo number 39, Inkosen. Ichigo whispered before spinning around and throwing a punch. Ikotsu. It wasn't an ordinary punch he threw, it was a spirit manifestation of his fist as big as the large chamber could allow and shielded by a large spinning yellow disc. As Ichigo threw his punch, Ichibe Hyasub flew at him and saw the attack coming. Very quickly the monk grabbed his large calligraphy brush and slashed the Kido with it, breaking the spell apart, and still managed to cut the fist heading toward him and reducing it to half power. The punch still connected but the old Shinigami caught it and rode the attack back to the opening of the palace before the fist dissipated, replaced by Ichigo bringing his blade down on Ichibe who just managed to get his brush to block it. "Ichigo! You can't do this!" The monk shouted while Ichigo tore off his damaged hand and grew a new one at full strength. "You don't know what you're doing. The Soul King cannot be revived. His current existence is what keeps the world stable. Or are you just saying that because you fear his judgment?" The hybrid returned before summoning multiple Zanjutsu blades to surround and point at the monk. "Yamamoto asked me to do this, to restore the Soul King to his proper self. And after learning what happened, I'm happy to do so." Ichibe's eyes widened before settling into a glare as he began to overpower Ichigo. "If you know, then you should understand that the Soul King allowed this to happen. This was all by his consent. No one would have consented to this." Ichigo roared back as his blades shot toward Ichibe, the monk pushing Ichigo back to dodge the blades and flash to the Hogyaku. He brought up his Ikimonji in an attempt to erase the sphere's name and power, but Ichigo reached out with another spirit manifestation to grab him and yank him away from the orb. "It's true that he may have sat by while you and the 4 original members of the great noble houses, the founding members of the Soul Society, sealed him away in crystal despite his power to stop you at any moment, but he didn't. Did he understand what was happening, or was he too shocked that the beings he protected would stand against him? The Soul King has a power called the Almighty, with it comes perfect precognition," Ichibe explained as he was forced back to the entrance and activating his Ikimonji. He knew what was going to happen. No, he knew what would possibly happen. Jugram Haskwalth, one of our Quincy allies, explained the truth in the powers of the Almighty. Behind Ichibe, Ichigo saw Urayu and his Zanpakuto finally arrive. With Kyoka Suijutsu's Bankai still active, Ichigo made his way to Ichibe while the monk remained unaware. "I'm willing to guess that the Soul King took a chance that he would simply be sealed in crystal and that you and the other founders would leave it at that. But you tore him apart while he was helpless, proving that faith misplaced." The room then felt a crushing riot so that made even Ichigo and Ichibe buckle under the sudden weight, nearly ending the illusion before Ichigo appeared beside the monk and swiftly cutting off the monk's arms. "Now it's time for you to pay." Giving the man no time to react, Ichigo shot a clawed hand into Ichibe's throat, digging his fingers directly into the monk's larynx and taking away the ability to talk. As he did that, Uriah fired a bolt into Ichigo's spine, paralyzing him and rendering the man completely helpless. Enough. The three of them heard a voice in their minds, ordering them to stop. All of them turned their attention to the Soul King, now with all his limbs and no longer gaunt from the lack of internal organs, with his crystal prison melting away into a throne. Whack vs Zero Squad. To say that the Zero Squad was fighting a losing battle was putting it mildly. All their speed, all their skill, all their preparations became meaningless in the face of Whack and the power of the Almighty. The man himself was already incredibly powerful, bearing a mastery of the Quincy abilities, but now he could peer into the future and predict the Zero Squad's moves. Uratsu and Tenjiro move with blinding speed, trying to find an opening to cut into Whack, only for the Quincy to block every attempt with an insulting level of disregard. The sharpest and most durable blade of the master swordsmith was failing to cut through Whack's pure Reishi blade, proving to be its match, and all the threading traps that Senjumaru set up and the heated white bone hell waters of Tenjiro's springs were always nimbly dodged by the Quincy. Almost as if he wanted to prove that nothing could stop him anymore, then everyone stopped when they all felt something. Father! Whack thought as he recognized the power and presence of the entity, the innate connection in his blood. You are awake. You are free. Now you can repay these Shinigami for your humiliation and suffering, and then we can make the world as it should be. The Quincy Emperor began laughing in victorious ecstasy at the thought of a truly wonderful win, the greatest returning insult to the Soul Reapers that tormented the first Quincy than merely ending his father's suffering. He continued laughing and laughing and laughing, each one growing ever weaker as the seconds passed, and nothing happened. The worlds remained stable, no great wave of power threatened to consume anyone, the Soul King was truly alive but was doing nothing. What's the matter? As Whack became confused, the Zero Squad moved on the attack. Uratsu slashed the Quincy to pieces, Senjumaru rearranged his being and sewn him back together as a misshapen figure, and Tenjiro unleashed a torrent of his life-draining waters that were hot enough to peel flesh from bones in seconds. Take your vengeance. Do as you've wanted for so long. Whack pleaded while the Zero Squad destroyed his body. Why? Have you forgotten your own will? Whack roared as he immediately restored his body and blew back the Zero Squad. In that case, I'll just have to do it all myself. If even you will betray me, then I'll remove it all. With that he went on the offensive, cutting down Uratsu, beheaded Senjumaru, and blasted Tenjiro into pieces before going to the cage-like tree that imprisoned them. He took hold of a trunk and caught Kiryo's neck in his other hand when she tried to attack him, choking the life from her until her neck snapped in his grip while his other hand drained all the Reishi from the trees and reducing it to a withered dead husk. The Quincy Emperor tossed aside the chef's broken body and tore down the trees, finding one person waiting for him on another wide and empty disc, standing between him and the royal palace. You! Whack growled as he flashed to the disc. Ichigo! The throne room. The room was silent as the Soul King stretched himself in his new throne, the sheer power in the being stunning Ichigo and Uriah while Ichigo remained paralyzed in the hybrid's grip. Slight groans and pops came from the formerly imprisoned being as he stretched for the first time in millions of years, treating the release of his torment like he had woken up from an extended nap. The hybrid eventually came to his senses and dragged the helpless monk to the revived god and knelt before the Soul King. Mighty Soul King, he said while hoping to gain the entity's favor, I am Ichigo Kurosake, scion of the Shiba clan. I know what was done to you and made it my mission to undo it. I know your anger is great, but I beg you to spare the rest of the Shinigami. If needed, I'll dash. Ichigo was then silenced as he felt something dig into his body from all over, looking up to find the Soul King's left hand extended and thousands of nerves digging into both his and Ichigo's body. The hybrid braced himself to try and resist any attempt to tear his being apart, but it never came. Instead he felt huge amounts of Reishi being pumped into his body while Ichigo looked like everything was being drained from his body. I am indeed furious, Ichigo Kurosake, but your concern is misplaced. The Soul King said in a velvet smooth tone with an echo that just soothed Ichigo's being. The ones that should suffer my wrath are mostly long dead, with that monk being the sole exception. Speaking of, this should tingle. Ichigo then began to spasm before raising a hand and summoned a hell gate that immediately shot out chains to Ichigo and pulled him into the abyss. And there, I have been avenged. The Soul King pulled his nerves from Ichigo's body, making the boy collapse as his body was forced to process and absorb a massive amount of reishi. The sheer amount made Ichigo thankful that the old monk was so unused to combat and that his own skills were so varied in allowing some key advantages. I did gamble on the better nature of the founding Soul Reapers, but only the original Shiba was compassionate enough to argue against my torment. For your service, I have granted you more than enough to do your first mission as my newest guard. What? Ichigo asked before feeling a sharp pain in his chest, opening his Shiakusho to find a new scar on the right side of his chest. An oaken scar. Everything in due time, Ichigo. For now, kill my treacherous son. The Soul King ordered, closing himself off from Ichigo and Uriah with a barrier as the Quincy made his was to his cousin. So, is this good news? Uriah asked, unsure what to make of the Soul King from his brief interaction with the god. Guess we'll find out later. The hybrid said, grabbing hold of Kagutsuka's sheath as the blade burned to be used. For now, let's finally end this, Uriah. The cousins looked to the cage of trees, feeling that the Zero Squad were now being slaughtered by Waiwak. Uriah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dagger and a single arrowhead, both made from the still silver from their mothers. Wanna see who gets the bullseye first? Uriah said, making Ichigo smile before taking the knife. An old competition from their childhood, now the confidence boost for the final battle. Ichigo vs Waiwak. Of course it would be you, the Quincy Emperor said as he moved to the platform Ichigo stood on, the bastard, the selfish child, the thieving brat stealing what's mine. Multiple Tensei Zanjutsu blades began to surround them in a cage of swords, floating just around the perimeter of the disc. I suppose it truly is only fitting that you be my final opponent, to take back what belongs to me. And what exactly have I taken that belongs to you? Ichigo asked, holding up his newest Zanpakuto by the sheath in front of him. Aizen's power? Yamamoto's power? What do I have that you would lay claim to? Everything. Waiwak roared as he summoned reishi arrows in the shape of broadswords around the interior of the disc, ready to shoot at Ichigo and the Zanjutsu blades around them. Everything you took is mine, everything you've ever had belongs to me, everything in the three worlds exist as my belongings. But you stole the power of Aizen and Yamamoto and convinced my children to turn against me. Their benefactor. It appears you've even stole away the will of the Soul King himself. I'm done letting you rob me of what is mine. I'm taking it all back here and now. And how is what I did different from you? Ichigo countered, taking hold of the hilt and causing his hand to burn and give off smoke. I did take from Aizen, but he wanted me to grow stronger. I took from my master, but he gave it to me. I only revived the Soul King, whether he forgave the Shinigami or not was his choice. As for your children, if they turned against you so easily, then you were just a shitty parent. Reduce all creation to ash. Ichigo pulled the sword from its sheath and released a powerful wave of heat that only grew stronger as more of the blade was freed, a fire catching on Ichigo's hand and climbing up his arm as he unsheathed his mentor's gift. Kagutsuki. All the moisture disappeared as the stones beneath their feet began to glow and melt by the heat of the blade. This is the power you've inherited from Yamamoto. Waiwak thought as he used Hirin Kyoku to levitate once he saw the stone floor beginning to melt. There's no denying that it's certainly hotter than what Genri Yusai could do in his prime, but you also lack the control to properly wield that power. Waiwak then took a quick glance through the many differing future timelines with his own almighty, seeing Ichigo attack with Getsugas, Zeros, Balas, Reishi arrows, various Kido, but two that seemed to appear more often was either a slash or a stab from Kagutsuki. He returned his focus to battle and in the brief moment of time that he spent seeing the future, Ichigo was just an inch away from piercing his skull. What the hell? The Quincy Emperor mentally screamed as he jumped away. Was that several speed techniques mixed together? His musing was cut short as Ichigo's blade sank into the melting stone and the entire disc erupted in a pillar of fire. Know this, you parasite, Ichigo started as soon as the flames stopped, nothing will stop me from killing you. From the many Zanjutsu around them came a quick barrage of bala, all aimed at Waiwak. The Quincy Emperor did see this attack, along with the Zero and arrows that were being charged and fired as well. There is no such thing as a future where I'll die. He shouted as he utilized the ultimate Quincy defense of Blood Vene Anhoben, shielding himself in a sphere made from his Blood Vene that began absorbing everything around it. Ichigo manifested a large spirit hand that wrapped around the shield and began to actually crush it, infecting it with his own Reishi and disrupting Waiwaka's control as Ichigo's energy acted like a viral infection. The Emperor reached out with Sclavere, allowing his Blood Vene to dissipate and the spirit hand to be absorbed into a Reishi blade, just as Ichigo appeared before him with two Zanjutsu in hand and a Getsuga Jujisho ready to fire. Then I'll just make one. Zero Getsuga Jujisho. Ichigo unleashed the most compressed and concentrated blast of destructive energy he could on the Quincy. Every future Waiwake saw this time showed a blast of Reishi of some kind in any direction but not where Ichigo was in that time, presumably because of the sheer size of the attack. Waiwake began to realize that something was messing with his future sight as the attack slammed into him, pushing him to the edge of the disc before his blade shattered and his chest was pierced with a gaping hole left behind. That damn brat. The Quincy Emperor thought, gasping for breath as he changed the future to allow him to live. Ichigo was already in front of him again, this time with Kagutsuka burning with completely black flames. Waiwake couldn't help but smirk as he revealed his trump card, forcing Ichigo to stop just shy of cutting the Quincy and completely undoing the burning field. You bastard! Ichigo roared as he looked at his twin sisters, Yuzo and Karen, bound and gagged with a familiar expression on their faces. An expression of experiencing pain from a fatal attack. Empathy, such a disgusting weak dash, Waiwake tried to say before Ichigo slashed his throat open, nearly decapitating the Quincy, which Waiwake saw and allowed simply to see the horror on the hybrid's face when the same thing happened to his sisters. A visage of shock and heartbreak that was evident even through the skull mask, Yamamoto never hesitated to do what was necessary, even, the old monk did what needed to be done when the time came. Waiwake stated while healing and feeling somewhat foggy when he tried to name Ichigo, only to have it erased from his mind by some odd means. But you? This is the second time your sisters were used against you and you still let them be your greatest weakness. Godei truly are a shadow of their true selves. Ichigo didn't even react as Waiwake reached out and took hold of Ichigo's face. Now, return to me what is mine. He roared as he began to consume Ichigo, only to find that the hybrid and the twins disappeared. What? He then saw Ichigo attacking him from every angle. I will tear your soul apart. Ichigo roared in layered tones while Waiwake blocked his attack, the frontal attack but not the ones from the sides and behind. Waiwake had assumed that the many different angles were different futures but in truth Ichigo had achieved what would be later called Godspeed, a perfect blend of Shunpo, Hirenkyaku, Sonido, and Bringer Light, that moved the hybrid faster than any other being in the history of Soul Society. Before he managed to mix 2 or 3 at most by being careful, now he just didn't care. With Uryu. That son of a bitch. Uryu growled as he paced the throne room helplessly as Yuzu and Karen had one cut after another appear on their bodies. When Ichigo began his fight with Waiwake, the Soul King brought the rest of the Zero Squad to his palace and revived them, stating that they still had some use. During that time Uryu was trying to get the perfect shot, waiting until Waiwake was sufficiently distracted or for Ichigo to restrain him, refusing to waste his one single shot on anything less than a guaranteed bullseye. Then the Quincy Emperor revealed his ace, Yuzo and Karen, as his meat shields. Ichigo immediately attacked in anger, positive that he could safely recover the twins during the time Waiwake would take to recover, but both he and Uryu were shocked to find the same damage appear on the girls. Ichigo, however, did not freeze and forced himself to move and pull his sisters away from Waiwake while using Kyoka's Bankai to mask his true movements. With that he deposited the girls with Uryu before heading back out to Waiwake, feeling nothing but the blackest of rage and hate for the parasitic entity. My treacherous son tied his life force to the girls. The Soul King explained to everyone while Tenjiro went about healing the girls, despite the man's protests that it was only healing Waiwake as well. Waiwake likely thought that the idea of hurting his sisters would be too much for Ichigo to bear, but that has clearly failed as Ichigo is now fighting more ferociously than before. Likely believing that he'll be able to save them somehow after killing Waiwake. And can he? Uryu asked as Waiwake slowly began to adapt Ichigo's movements, gaining fewer and fewer cuts on his being. He won't have to, you already have the means to free them. The Soul King stated, gaining the attention of everyone in the throne room. Once you hit him with that still silver, his connection will be broken. He'll be completely powerless for the briefest of instances, which will be enough to sever the connection to the girls. Uriah's eyes shined in hope before quickly switching back to determination. I've already told Ichigo. He said you'll see your chance soon. The god stated as Uriah rushed back out to the opening of the palace, spying Ichigo with golden chains wrapped around his left arm. Uriah summoned his bow, brought up a silver arrowhead and waited. Back to the fight. Come on Uriah, Ichigo thought as he kept up his assault, occasionally glancing over to his cousin to see if he was ready. Finally Uriah showed up and readied his shot, causing Ichigo to smile, but was unaware of how much Wiwak adapted and how much the hybrid slowed down. Ichigo reacted too late as a swing was deflected and a reishi blade cut his face, going from the top of his cheek under his right eye to just above the middle of his eyebrows. From there came a couple more slashes across his body before using Kyoka's Bankai to create a duplicate and gain some distance. That's on me, getting distracted now of all times. Ichigo growled as the chains glowed with divine power. Now bind him, Inkiju. The hybrid roared, slamming his palm into the disc as shimmering golden portals appeared beneath him. Moving according to his will, the chains around his arm shot into the portal and reappeared around Wiwak before wrapping around his form tightly. What is dash? The Parasite Emperor thought as Ichigo allowed Kyoka's Bankai to fade, revealing the chains and himself. Before Wiwak could do anything, something shot into his back and he felt utterly powerless. He couldn't move, even as the chains faded away. He couldn't see the future, only Ichigo immediately appearing before him with a simple silver knife, and then Wiwak saw nothing. Ichigo took his still silver blade and cut through Wiwak's eyes, effectively destroying the power of the Almighty. I'm finishing this. Ichigo roared while Wiwak was howling in pain, pressing against his ruined eyes in a vain attempt to do something to stop the pain or to heal himself. Ichigo did not care as he slammed a clawed hand into the Quincy's face, fingers going into the still bleeding eyes of Wiwak as Ichigo threw his opponent through the disc they were fighting on and shattered it to pieces. As the two began to fall, Ichigo reached out and summoned a Hellgate, having smelled a heavy stench of sin on Wiwak that would guarantee his entry into perdition. The gates opened and hell chains shot out immediately, impaling Wiwak in various places before pulling him down with Ichigo still hanging on. They passed through the labyrinth of the first level, the ocean of the second, the acidic wasteland of the third, the ash graveyard of the fourth, and all the way down to the lava pits where damned souls are revived to continue their torment. No. Stop. I demand, please don't. Wiwak started to beg as they descended as his greatest fear was becoming a reality. First he lost his sight when Ichigo destroyed his eyes, then he lost his sense of smell and taste as the scent of burning flesh disappeared along with the taste of ash. Soon he failed to hear his own screams of pain and horror as the sacrificial souls that sustained him drained away. His limbs then fell limp to the ground and his screams ended, no longer able to move without the lives of others fueling him. Finally he lost the sense of touch, only knowing tremendous pain as burning lava healed his flesh only to cause endless pain that he could only remember. The sealed king of the Quincy. Over 900 years, he shall recover his heartbeat. Over 90 years, he shall recover his intellect. Over 9 years, he shall recover his power. And over 9 days, he shall recover the world. Then in one, he would lose it all. Wiwak was defeated. I doubt you can hear me, but I'm not content with this. Ichigo said as the Kusanada began to herd around him. I believe I said that I'd tear your very soul apart. Ichigo then paused as the jailers of hell relayed a message. Really? I like it. The hybrid said before grabbing Kagutsuka's hilt. Reduce all creation to ash, Kagutsuka. His arm was engulfed in flames again while golden energy of hell started flowing into the sword's fire. Soon a Tensei Zanjutsu blade came to the flames before converting into a Mujutsu, likewise merging with the fire to become black flames with gold flashes. Ichigo raised the blade while Wiwak was raised by the chains, with the blade pointing directly at the Quincy's heart. Now fade, penance. Ichigo called out before thrusting the burning blade into the fallen Quincy, erupting into a pillar of black and gold flames that consumed Wiwak's remains. The flesh burned away instantly, the skeleton was reduced to ash that itself burned away into nothing, and the soul itself became non-existent. Wiwak was permanently destroyed. It was finally over. The mission Ichigo had for over 10 years had finally come to an end. He started chuckling, then laughing in triumph as he reverted to his base form before falling into the lava river, completely unconscious. The heat and fires would not harm Ichigo, for this hell was his realm and the Kusanada were his servants. One reached down to grasp and carry the now sleeping Ichigo to some place more fitting. Soon another gate appeared above them, with a new Quincy Emperor coming down for the hybrid. Chapter 106, Endings and Beginnings. Soul King's Throne Room. Pain. That's what Ichigo felt throughout his entire being as he started to wake up, not a sharp and stabbing pain from a fresh injury but more of a dull throb from one that was healing. His soul on the other hand still felt like it was on fire and it was barely calming down. The hybrid opened his eyes to see that he was back in the throne room of the Soul King. The members of the Zero Squad had been revived and Tenjiro was healing Ichigo in a sphere of his white bone hell water to push out all of the damage, and there was quite a lot of damage. Uriah was in the corner with Yuzu and Karen watching Ichigo. Yuzu was clearly worried while Karen was trying to appear confident that their brother would be fine. The bubble of water eventually shrank to free Ichigo's head, allowing him to breathe and hear, likely since the Soul King was speaking. Penance should never be used again, Ichigo. The Soul King immediately ordered with the full power of his authority. Unless it is impossible to seal away whoever it is that you would use this on, you will not use that attack ever again. You completely erased my foolish son from existence. He will not be reincarnated, he will never be revived, you even burned away his name. All that remains of him is a scant memory that someone like him existed, but it will never be on the forefront of anyone's mind. He is gone, and doing something like that bears a heavy burden. The Soul King held out a hand and the calligraphy brush of Ikemonji flew to him. This brush has a technique, Futentai Satsuryo, where it absorbs massive amounts of black to create a mausoleum that would take away all the blackness of his opponent, killing them and ensuring they'll never reincarnate. So much darkness that one would steal 100 nights from any world if they used it. You bore the price entirely on your own. I could tell. Ichigo rasped out, prompting Kiryu to get him a drink of tea that she brewed to aid in his revitalization. All of his sin was converted to heat and hellish flames that I had to hold within me and bear while he burned away. He may have lived for over 1,000 years, but it's easy to accumulate sin like that. The Soul King added before waving a hand, Ichigo feeling his restoration accelerating before Tenjiro released the bubble of water. If you can avoid it, never use that technique again. Ichigo bowed his head in understanding before Tenjiro grabbed his head and looked over the hybrid. Well, you've mostly healed up, but you have a few scars. The founding healer stated, tracing the one over Ichigo's right eye. It doesn't impair your vision, but I can get rid of it if you want. Leave it alone, I want a reminder. Ichigo ordered while pushing him off. He needed one, a reminder of what he went through, of what was sacrificed, of what he lost, all because of that damn selfish parasite. Soon after that he was tackled to the ground by his two sisters as they hugged him tightly, apologizing for being a burden on him yet again. Never think like that, you two. Ichigo said as he returned their hug. Neither of you will ever be a burden. I'm just sorry I hurt you so much. We promise. Yuzu said as the two cried in relief and self-disappointment. We promise we'll get stronger so that this never happens again. Ichigo rubbed their backs in a soothing manner while Uriah walked up to his cousin, the two sharing a look before Uriah started chuckling. After all this time, it's finally over. The Quincy laughed out with mixed emotions of relief and exhaustion. Years spent training, dealing with all of Soul Society's problems, getting ready for the revival of the man that tried to take everything and destroy what he couldn't, all for his own selfish wants, and now it was over. Their life's goal had been complete. It's not over yet, you two. The Soul King interrupted, causing everyone to look at him. This battle is done, but after every war comes the task of rebuilding. Laying to rest those that have lost their lives in battle, restructuring the flawed and corrupted system the nobles had, adding the Quincy to this new system. There is still plenty for you to do. But first, he waved his hand again and the members of the Zero Squad grasped at different parts of their bodies while gasping in surprise and pain. The Zero Squad is finished. I will only have one guard from now on, the rest of you will return to the Siriti and make more contributions to them. Make yourselves properly useful again, I will be able to protect myself. Speaking of, here it comes. The palace shook, forcing everyone to turn to the palace entrance to see a giant Ajicha's hollow that shocked Ichigo to his core. Akomikidam. Urutsu breathed out in shock as he and the remaining Shinigami began sweating bullets. It was a large white humanoid with short legs and long arms with bear-like claws at the end, no visible neck so it looked like it had a wide face with an odd jack-o'-lantern smile ending in circles with 4 yellow eye-like orbs, and hexagonal-shaped scales going down its back with a small bearded hollow mask in the middle of its odd smile. An ancient hollow from before I made the first Zanpakuto, so powerful that it threatened the stability of the worlds. But the monk removed his name and changed it to that meaningless one to severely weaken his power before they sealed him in one of the first Zanpakuto. The Soul King continued as the hollow made its way to the throne. Do you remember your real name? Yes. The hollow responded in a low rumble. You tried to eat me when I was weakened. The god continued, showing no fear to the beast. Do you think you can now? Silence as the hollow didn't want to admit that the being before him was more powerful than himself. You belong to me, as my sword and guard dog. Failure to comply and I'll take away your name, or just feed you to that kid over there. Akomikidam looked over to Ichigo, who got over his initial fear and looked at the Ajichas with hunger in his eyes. Like you, his growth is endless. Unlike before, there are Shinigami more than capable of killing you. Do you submit? The hollow turned back to the Soul King and began to fade, turning into a pure white broadsword with black spots and falling into the Soul King's hand before being set to rest against the arm of his crystal throne. Good boy. The god said before pointing to Urayu. Now one more thing before you all leave. Stand before me, Urayu Ishida. The Quincy complied and stood before the Soul King, who reached out and touched Urayu's forehead. The Quincy as a whole need a leader, someone that truly cares for them and will lead them down a righteous path, not one of destruction. As such, I carve unto your soul that authority to lead them, as the progenitor of all the Quincy. Urayu jumped back, screaming as he reached for his eyes. Ichigo moved to his cousin's side as Urayu revealed multiple pupils in his eyes. You now share in the power of the Almighty, every power my son was capable of is now yours to wield. Urayu's eyes returned to normal as he dropped to his knees. That's hard, to control. Urayu panted from exhaustion. Draining too. You will learn to control it in time. The Soul King said before turning back to Ichigo. You will be executing someone very soon, Ichigo. And when you do, bring me his sword as well. Urutsu tried to hide his surprise as he immediately guessed what blade the Soul King would want. Now, be gone. The barriers are gone and you have much to do. The king dismissed as the curtains closed, leaving the former Zero Squad members and Ichigo's family. The group of 8 went to the entrance of the palace and jumped, beginning their return to the Soul Society. All of this the Soul King watched with his own almighty sight, smiling before disabling his clairvoyance and precognition to properly look through his own eyes for the first time since his imprisonment. Back to the Siriti. The group of 8 continued to descend, a trip that normally took days by normal shunpo cut to mere minutes by a sudden gate appearing and transporting them down to above the central city of the Soul Society, seeing the realm free of the shadow that switched out the Shinigami capital with the Quincy's silver now gone and the Soul Society mostly restored. There was still tons of damage from the previous battle with the Vandenreich, but that could be fixed easily. Buildings can be rebuilt, but many of the dead could not be revived. The assembled forces of the Godai and the surviving Quincy noticed them and began to crowd near the predicted landing zone. Once they touched down, before anyone could say anything, Ishine and Masaka burst through the crowd and hugged their children. Oh my babies! I'm never going to let this happen again. Ishine said, letting tears of relief fall as he and his wife held their daughters. Ichigo was grabbed and pulled into the massive arms and embracing, letting it happen as he could tell just how stressful this was on the mother and father. He had to wonder how long they were actually feeling like this and how he could let them stew in that worry and concern. Ichigo then felt a whisper in the back of his mind as he was finally released by his parents. Mom, Auntie Myra wanted to say she's sorry. He said as Masaka looked confused as Ichigo handed her the Aaron Carr's pendant. The moment Masaka touched the metal her eyes widened in shock and surprise before tears started to form. That was so mean of her. The matriarch of the Kurosaka family said, opening the pendant and seeing the pictures of herself and the disguised form of the Aaron Carr that was her best friend. disappearing without saying goodbye. You were supposed to be there with us, Myra. She sobbed, prompting the family to embrace her again. Ichigo was the first to let go, joining the rest of the assembled Shinigami, Arrancar, and Quincy with Urayu at his side. So he's gone? Kiraku asked the pair. Gone for good. I burned him away to nothingness. The Quincy King is gone. Ichigo announced, prompting cheers and celebrations from some while others smiled quietly at the return of peace. Bambietta came out of the crowd and jumped onto Ichigo, giving him a deep kiss, followed soon by the rest of his harem. No fair. I want some strawberry sugar too. Candace yelled out as she claimed the next kiss, and Ichigo didn't really have a say as all of his lovers took turns. Then he felt something poking his neck rather harshly. You took my Bambi. He saw a girl with a dopey expression that was burning with hate, anger, and jealousy. I'll kill you. She roared as her Reishi arrowhead failed to even pierce his neck, guarded as it was from the clothes Senjumaru made in his own passive arrow. Everyone backed away as she tried to kill the hybrid before Kenpeka grabbed her by the throat and pulled her off. So, can we agree that she doesn't get to stay? He asked while looking over the crowd. She's insane and would probably try to kill me. Go ahead. Bambietta said while Orium fussed over Ichigo's non-existent neck wound. Urayu instead walked up to her and placed a hand on her head, with Giselle soon screaming afterward before going limp. By the will of the Soul King, I was granted the powers of the Almighty. He announced to everyone, revealing his eyes to the surviving members of the Vandenreich, the Godii, and the Arrancar. He named me the new king of the Quincy. If anyone wishes to challenge me for it, then go ahead. But as king, I declare allegiance and brotherhood to the Soul Society. He turned to Kiraku while holding out his free hand. If they should accept it. Not doing so the first time was a mistake. The current head captain said as he made his way to Urayu and shook his hand. I welcome you, King Urayu Ishida. Urayu smiled before turning back to the remaining Sternritters. If you want to leave, go ahead. I won't stop you. I'm not a tyrant pretending to be generous. The assembled Quincy looked to each other while they made their decisions. Hashwalth stepped forward before anyone. Everything I did was for the future of the Quincy. He stated before kneeling before the new king. I put my faith in one that would lead us to a brighter future. Bazby walked up next to him and did the same. Someone's gotta keep an eye out for this dope. He said while the other Quincy followed suit, some for selfish reasons like keeping their powers or fondness for a certain hybrid, while Robert wanted to retire and teach the future Quincy since they'd need one. They soon went into talks about how the Quincy would integrate themselves into the new Godii system when Urayu all but stated that they'd be the new Squad 15 and the Silburn would be their base. Urahara and Mayuri then started planning on moving the Silburn into the shadow of Karakura town based on the reports Urayu made about Reverse London during his time with Wingbind. As that was going on, Kiraku grabbed Ichigo and told it that there was something he needed him to do, finally put an end to Tokinata Tsunayashiro. Siritii, unmarked prison. During the walk over to Tsunayashiro's holding cell, Kiraku filled Ichigo in on the prisoner, who he was, why he was in prison, and why Ichigo was slated to execute him. Aizen did unforgivable acts with the ambition of power, but also thought he could do a better job than what the founding members of the Soul Society did. Waiwak was a real monster driven by sheer selfishness and an understandable disgust of how the Soul King came into being and the fear of his own death. Tokinata Tsunayashiro had neither. No end goal, no sympathetic motivation, he just loved to cause pain and was able to get away with it. Does he have a notable Zanpakuto? Ichigo asked as Kiraku revealed the hidden prison. Wouldn't surprise me if he did. The head captain admitted as the pair descended into the depths of the single-occupant prison. All notable clans and noble families have an ancestral Zanpakuto that anyone of that family can use. Nanao is part of one such clan that are charged with performing rites and rituals, so they only have that one sword. Wait. I don't remember seeing her with a sword. Ichigo noted, thinking back on all the times he's seen the lieutenant. I don't think I've ever seen her dash. She's basically my secretary, not a combatant. Her mother asked me to keep their family sword for safekeeping. He said, revealing why Nanao never fought. I won't ask why you want the Tsunayashiro clan's sword, but I'm betting it's an order from the Soul King," he said before they reached the prison cell of Tokinata Tsunayashiro, Ichigo flinching from the burning stench of sin emanating from the noble that reminded him all too much of his time in that other dimension. "Where's your sword?" Ichigo demanded upon seeing Tokinata, who was looking more raggedy and angry in the time since Kurako left. Evidence of people tending to his basic needs of food and water were evident, but some spots of blood suggest that he was less appreciative of whoever was still loyal enough to aid him. The fact that his entire prison was made of Sekizeki stone with a one-of-a-kind lock that would break if anyone tried any other key made his escape impossible under the conditions that happened. Tokinata looked to Ichigo and scoffed. "My Zanpakuto was taken when I was dishonorably discharged from the Godai," he answered. "I have no idea where it is." Ichigo took the key Kurako offered and opened the prison cell, reaching for one of his 3 blades. "But," he yelled, holding his hands up to stop Ichigo's march, "I will tell you where my family's Zanpakuto is, if you get me out of these cuffs." He held his hands out. "If I'm to die, at least let me go out fighting. Or would you deny me that honor?" Ichigo thought it over before looking to Kurako. "If you really want to fight him, I'll keep an eye on him while you secure that blade," he offered while handing Ichigo another key. The hybrid took it and held it before Tsunayashiro. "My ancestral Zanpakuto is called Kuten Kyokoku, and it's buried in my family's garden," he said before gesturing for Ichigo to unlock his Reishi restraints sealing his power. As Ichigo quickly unlocked his ankles and moved to his wrists, a new voice started talking. "Man, that ain't her name," Uratsu shouted as he walked down, with Scat Hatch next to him. "That sword's real name is Inrakuten and it's in his hand." Tokinata hissed just as Ichigo freed him and he revealed a hilt without a blade. The noble tried to stab Ichigo with it, but the hybrid caught his wrist, feeling something pass along his cheek but failed to cut him. However, before he could crush Tsunayashiro's wrist, the hilt revealed thousands of cherry blossoms. Scat Hatch created a wall of ice between herself, Kurako, and Uratsu and Ichigo and Tokinata. "Die, you bastard!" Tsunayashiro roared as the thousands of petal blades converged on Ichigo like a whirlwind, but failed to cut him due to his use of blood, arrow, and greater Ryutsu, at first. Eventually Ichigo started feeling light cuts before his arm was cut off at the elbow, freeing Tokinata. "You won't dash!" He was cut off by Ichigo grabbing his face and slamming him against the wall. Tokinata was dazed but not unconscious, as evidenced by his use of Senbon Zikura, which had gained a black and yellow glow. Before whatever it was could happen, Ichigo just pounded away at the guy with rapid-fire punches that made the entire prison shake before landing one more punch that left a spiderweb crack behind Tokinata's body. The petals converged on the hilt to reveal a katana blade. "I'll be taking this," Ichigo said as he grabbed the hilt of the Inrakuten before walking out of the prison cell, then snapping his fingers to summon a hellgate. He didn't bother looking back as Tokinata was dragged into hell for his sins. Realizing it was over, Scat Hatch dispelled the ice as Uratsu looked over the ancestral blade. "Probably the strongest Zanpakuto I've ever made," the smith admitted as he handed it back to Ichigo after pulling out a sheath from out of nowhere and putting it on the blade. "The shikai of that sword is to mimic any shikai that its wielder has seen before." "Is that how he had Seben Zakura's abilities?" Ichigo guessed. "And no Zarashi and Suzumibuki, which is why you almost died before pounding that prick into the wall," Uratsu scolded, poking Ichigo's forehead harshly. "You need to be more careful. You're now the only member of the Zero Squad, the last line of protection for the Soul King from having to get off that throne. Be a bit more careful." Ichigo stayed stunned from the knowledge that he almost died and that Uratsu, arguably the goofiest member of the previous royal guard, was the one to tell him to get his act together was a little jarring. He almost missed it when Uratsu and Scat Hatch had started talking about weapon crafting. Saying goodbye. A few days passed after the execution. Ichigo had given Inrakuten to the Soul King. He finally met the remaining heroic legacies from around the world. The Siriti was rebuilt with some notable improvements. The project to recreate the Silburn in the shadow of Karakura was nearing completion, and everyone that had lost their lives in this damned war had been gathered together. It took 3 days to gather the remaining bodies from wherever else they were from the Silburn to Hueco Mundo and for the Jigai/Regai research teams to gather data on all those bodies to optimize potential bodies, but now it was time to lay them to rest. Jugram and the surviving Sternritters were doing their own goodbyes to their former comrades, though no love appeared to be lost from the Quincy. Cuculain and Achilles stuck with Ikeku and Squad 11 as they began to say their goodbyes to the fallen brothers in arms, the whole squad unanimously agreeing to learn some Kido to honor their former third seat. Medea was with Anohana, crying over all the lives she failed to save while the motherly captain tried to soothe the sobbing girl. Karna did his own ceremony for his rival, since there was no body to bury, and Atlanta preferred to keep her distance. Scathatch, Hassan, and the former members of the Zero Squad went to Yamamoto's grave to bid their final goodbyes with the exception of Kiryu who joined with Hiyori in the main plaza. Ichigo was with the captains while Kiraku talked about the courage, bravery, honor in the face of their duty and Ichigo just didn't hear anything. He was tired. Sairachi, Merrick, Myra, Rinnegunga, Rudborn, Yumichika, Swafon, Tsukishima, Kojiro, Master Yamamoto. Rangiku. He thought going over all the people he had called friend and comrade, some he was closer to than others. Hearing about Rangiku, even now seeing her body among the dead, didn't seem real. She was so happy, so full of life and love, the whole world seemed a little darker now that she wasn't in it. Orium still looked like she was going to cry, something Ichigo hadn't done at all since Yamamoto died. The drive from burning anger and vengeance was gone and now he was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of losing people, tired of his family being kidnapped, he wanted to be done. Go. Ichigo. Yukatake said, snapping Ichigo out of his daze. It's almost time. The two turned their attention on Kiraku as he gave Ichigo his cue, the head captain standing next to a long wall with the names of every member of the Godii that died in the war separated by their squads. And now we bid our friends goodbye. Kiraku nodded to Ichigo as he walked out among the dead and held up his Kagutsuki. One quick release and the barest exposure of the blade and all the bodies were alight in flames, the power of the fire blade quickly reducing them to ashes near instantly. After that the Kido Corps scattered the ashes to the wind, Ichigo watching it all with an impassive look but many could see the exhaustion in him. Some kept their distance, other placed a reassuring hand on his shoulders, his family and lovers hugged him, but only one stuck around. Ichigo. Izurukira said as everyone else left. I've got a message to give you, from Captain Ichimaru. It was then that the hybrid realized that he didn't see Jin once during this entire ordeal, not since he came back down from the royal palace. He said to meet him where he first found Rangiku. Rukanga, unnamed field. She told him about it once, how she was a starving child in the Rukon with no one to care or help, until Jin showed up and shared some persimmon with her. She made a conscious effort to forget about the days before she met Jin, only counting the days after they met. Ichigo was able to find him after some time, sitting alone with a bag and a few wine bottles, while the sky darkened with the sense that it might rain but never does. When the teen went up to him, Jin immediately handed him a bottle of clear reddish-orange liquid. A few sniffs and Ichigo figured out that it was persimmon wine, a pretty strong wine. That was going to be a wedding gift for you two after the war. Jin explained as he took a swig from another bottle. I was looking forward to that day and spent quite a lot of time making the brew just right. Still had a long way to go, but what's the point now? Ichigo looked down and Jin continued to look at him expectantly. The hybrid got the hint and took a long drink from the bottle, enjoying the sweet flavor and slight burn from the alcohol. Stop looking like that kid, I don't blame you and never had. The Vizard captain said, waving his hand about like he was wiping away his cares. She'd be upset with me if I did and we all know you can't be everywhere at once. You went above and beyond what any Shinigami has ever done, which was far more than anyone should have asked of you. Thanks. Ichigo managed to squeeze out. The two continued to drink in silence until Jin poured out the rest of his bottle in the ground. To the fallen. Jin said before Ichigo did the same. Jin had one more unopened bottle but set it aside as he stood up, looking at the gray sky. Everything seems just a little darker, now that you're not here. He whispered, facing Ichigo and ready to fight. You know why I asked you to come here? Ichigo didn't say anything, he just drew Zanjutsu and activated his Shikai. Make it quick. There was a pause as the two waited, tense for the moment to strike. The two then disappeared in a burst of speed and reappeared in the middle, with Jin impaled on the two Zanjutsu. Jin. Ichigo started, choking up as his emotions started to come out. Save it, Jin said, coughing out a bit of blood as he dropped his sword to hug Ichigo while he bled to death. No use crying over someone like me. I never cared about anything, except for her. I became a Soul Reaper to get close to Aizen and kill him, because he hurt her. I stayed as a Shinigami because she would be sad if I completely disappeared. I wanted her to be happy, so I asked you to do it because you were more capable than I was. Ichigo let go of his blades and returned the hug, feeling the life fade from Jin's body. This was a really shitty place growing up. But it looked almost livable when I was walking through it. That was your influence, to make the Rokanga a better place. Keep up the good work, kid. Soul Society's in good hands. Jin. The captain's legs gave out and Ichigo lowered him to the ground. Not for me, but for everyone else, let it out. Jin said as he coughed a few more times. I'm too weak to live in a world without her. I can't bear it. I'm not strong enough to go on like you, kid. I really wanted to be an uncle, too. Jin said no more, the smile on his face still there as his life ended. Again another friend and ally to the list of those he lost, because of what was lost. The rain finally fell as Ichigo let out an anguished cry, alone with no one to hear as he screamed out his pain. 1 week later. The official story was that Jin was poisoned in his fight against King Du and some of the other Quincy, and he wanted his final moments to be somewhere he remembered fondly. Kiraku, the other captains, and Uriah were the only other ones that knew the truth, and it was agreed to carve his name on the memorial wall. Ichigo burned his body to ash so there was no evidence to refute his claims, not that anyone wanted to since there was enough pain already and it made no sense to disgrace one of their own. Everyone just wanted to move on and start the process of healing. There was a lot of back and forth travel for Ichigo as the Godai needed to fill in their vacant roles. Uriah was still the lieutenant of Squad 15, but that didn't matter to the Quincy as they still listened to him first, and Uriah still needed time to adjust to being a main leader, so Ishine still remained as captain until further notice. To help with the transition, Urtsu began crafting a Zanpakuto equivalent for the Quincy that would still mix with their Volstandi but was as of yet unnamed since the Soul King had that authority and power now. Lisa was appointed the interim captain of Squad 8 until she decided to fully take it, but Kiraku implied that someone else would hold that position in the future. Ichigo and Kiraku agreed on making Halibel the new Squad 16 captain since she was more of a leader than any other Arrancar and was closer to the role of Queen of Hueco Mundo than Nilil. Ichigo was still their leader as king, but that paled in the future role of captain commander of the whole Godai, so it wasn't reasonable to make him the captain of the Hollow Division. As for the foreign heroes, Karna and King Hassan left pretty early after deciding their roles in this war were over, though Hassan told Ichigo to find him when he was finally ready to begin his training under the Master Assassin. Achilles and Kyulane spent some time hanging out with some of the rowdier members of the Godai that Ikeku introduced them to and going to drink with before Scathatch and Atlanta stopped them. Eventually it was time for the Greeks and the Celts to return to their homes as well. But before that Achilles and Cu wanted to challenge Ichigo to a friendly spar. They spent almost the whole week trying to talk him into it when hearing about him before the war, but have yet to actually see him in action. Scathatch was the one that managed to talk him into finally doing it, stating that she made a promise to Yamamoto and that she intended to keep it, so seeing Ichigo in action would be useful. So, how is this supposed to go? Ichigo asked Achilles and Cu while checking the straps on his new uniform. Similar to his previous outfit but with far stronger restraints since Ichigo gained the sum total of Aizen, Yamamoto, and Ichibe's Ryuryoku, leaving only the Soul King stronger than him. The outfit was meant to contain him down to levels that wouldn't destroy everything around him until he could control it all, which still left him stronger and faster than anyone in the Godai Squads 1. Well, Master just wants a better idea on what to do with your training. Cu said, swinging around a practice pole in lieu of his gibalg. Achilles and Ichigo also had the same type of wood staff, as per Scathika's orders. When the two spear masters started to complain about the matter, she said the alternative was to fight her. They immediately agreed to stick to fighting Ichigo just to avoid angering the Queen of Dunscath. So let's go until you lose. Pretty cocky, aren't ya? The hybrid said while lifting his staff and getting into what he recognized as a combat stance, though the result was more than a little awkward. I won't deny my lack of any training with a spear, but I'm pretty sure I'm stronger and faster. Achilles and Cu seamlessly shifted into their own stances. Prove it. Achilles yelled out in excitement before shooting towards Ichigo at speeds that were impressive for pure leg strength alone, while Cu moved to flank the hybrid from the right. Reflexively Ichigo tried to block them like he was wielding a sword, but that ended with him stumbling a little and getting touched by their staves, on his solar plexus and the back of his knees. At the same moment those staves made contact with him, he jumped and, to the two spear masters, disappeared. What the dash? The rush of wind alerted the Greek warrior to an overhead strike. Well? Ichigo asked as he swung the staff down just as Achilles blocked the downward swing, making a loud crack as the poles collided. Fast enough. Ichigo disappeared again when Cu attempted to stab him with his pole. Or should I go faster? He started blitzing around the two, creating many afterimages while surrounding them. Okay, he's faster than us. Cu admitted while he and Achilles stood back to back, scanning the different afterimages of Ichigo. Suddenly Achilles swung his staff to block Ichigo's own, which he had thrown at the two. Once Achilles deflected it, Ichigo flashed over and grabbed onto Achilles' staff while flipping over the Greek. Cu turned and saw this, quickly drawing a few runes that shot fire at the hybrid. Ichigo saw this and quickly cast Sai to restrain Cuculane's arms, forcing the Celt's arms behind his back from the sudden countercast. As Ichigo completed his flip, he shot a kick into Cu's unprotected chest and sent him flying away, then twisted his body as he landed to wrestle Achilles for his staff. Tell me, is this really satisfying? Ichigo asked as they fought for staff, trying to rip it from the other's grip. A little, but not enough. Achilles admitted before slamming his head into Ichigo's own blood and arrow-reinforced skull. Can you give a little more? I thought Kenpeki had a thick skull. Ichigo muttered before his veins glowed red. Oh boy. The spearman said before getting hit with the hybrid's own headbutt, before he freed a hand from the staff and slammed a fist into the Greek's gut. Achilles felt the full force of the punch pass through his body, stumbling back from the blow, and smiled in excitement. Now that's more like it. He yelled out before tossing away the staff and brought his fists up in a pancration stance before charging. He threw many rapid-fire punches and a few strong kicks, Ichigo blocking or dodging them before returning his own. It's like punching a steel wall with this guy, Ichigo thought as another punch hit Achilles' face, but the guy powered through anyway. Achilles threw another punch to Ichigo's head, prompting the hybrid to block, but it was a feint as the actual attack went for Ichigo's solar plexus. The hybrid coughed out all the air in his lungs as Achilles then threw a Spartan kick into Ichigo's core and threw him back. Come on Ichigo. I thought you'd be tougher than that. The Greek taunted as Ichigo got back to his feet. Cuculain freed himself from the Kido, but had opted to watch until he could engage in his own one-on-one, standing next to his teacher. Then he noticed a slight shift in the air around Ichigo. You finally noticed? Scat Hatch asked as Ichigo's veins glowed again. Cu nodded as Ichigo flashed to the Greek with both fists buried in Achilles' torso, realizing that Ichigo was way faster and likely way stronger. And that outfit still restrains his power. Now I see why Yama thought I'd be interested. So Kotsu. Ichigo whispered as a shockwave of air burst from the point of impact with the sound of broken bones cracking throughout the air. Ichigo backed away while Achilles wrapped his arms around his body. That only fractured your ribs? What are you made of? Achilles let out a short laugh before smiling at the hybrid. I may not be invulnerable like my namesake, but I'm certainly durable enough. He said before coughing out some blood. I think that's enough. Yes it is. They heard someone yell when Atlanta appeared and punched Achilles in the head. We were supposed to be going home today, you idiot. Yet here you are, sparring, and getting hurt. She scolded while Medea ran up to heal him. Come on sis. Achilles started, hoping to calm the irate lioness, who then punched him again. We're going home. We did what we came here to do. She turned to Ichigo again and bowed her head. It was an honor to fight alongside a noble hero. May our paths meet again as allies once more. She then turned, grabbed Achilles by the ear, and dragged him away while Medea was still healing him. Ichigo rubbed his knuckles, now healed after breaking them, punching Achilles. One tough bastard. He thought before getting a heavy slap to his back. Nice display there, kid. Scat Hatch yelled out with a smile while Cu was next to her. I wasn't expecting much skill with a spear from a novice, but you're definitely good on physical ability. Now I don't have to worry about training your body so much. Her smile then turned more sadistic. I'm going to have a lot of fun training you. She tossed a stone tablet to Ichigo, who caught it on reflex. That rune stone will guide you to my domain, just throw it in the air when you're at the Isle of Sky. Don't keep me waiting for too long. I'm gonna go and gather materials for your spear. Bye. She said happily before using rune magic to open a portal to her domain, walking through happily. Yukilane looked back to Ichigo with a smile before holding out his arm. Till then, brother disciple. He said as Ichigo tapped the hound's wrist with his own, watching as the spearman followed his teacher. Ichigo let out a sigh, remembering that he's expected to undergo more training. Can I at least take a few months to myself? He asked as he started walking back to the Siriti, then his phone rang about a text from Kiraku. Something about him needing to go to Kyoto before he can even leave Japan. Never ends, does it? He sighed before flashing to the Squad 1 barracks. Royal Palace. So, this must be boredom. The Soul King said, realizing that he was completely alone inside his palace, aside from Akomikidam, and he wasn't in a talking mood. I've made a terrible mistake. Check the description for the links to the author.